Yeah, I think that's working. So before I start, I just want to go over a few housekeeping things. Every fortnight, I've been sending an invitation to this show on my Google Plus page, and I've left the link in the description of the YouTube video, so that people can add me on Google Plus. It's really helpful to me if everyone that wants an invite adds me on that page, so I can keep track. A lot of people have still been adding the wrong profile. So make sure you add the one that's in the link and not the other one. And also conversely, please don't add me to Google Plus if you are not interested in this show. If you want to follow me from some other reason, I'd much prefer you subscribe because because otherwise I only use the Google Plus page for this show. Anyway, we're going to think about how science undermines religion, and I think that's the gist of what was going on last time in the Magic Sandwich show. I remember talking about how it's rather depressing that no one really gets to have much of an opinion unless you're an expert in the field. Do you?
I'm sorry. What did you say? The last thing?
Oh yeah, I was getting a bit of feedback. Yeah, so I was saying I remember making the point on the last version of the show that it was rather depressing that if you want to have an opinion on something, you have to be a sort of authority, and people like to have opinions. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, they don't necessarily have to have some credentials or something. They just need to know what they're talking about, in my opinion. I don't care if you have a doctorate or anything, just as long as what you are saying is factually correct. And yes, you can talk about scientific stuff, but what you cannot do is that you cannot undermine established scientific theories if you don't have the credential or knowledge to do so. For example, you can't just challenge the theory of evolution or gravity and such unless you have a PhD, because if you don't have a PhD in those fields, you don't have the necessary knowledge in order to criticize those theories. The knowledge to do so is so vast that you would need years before you could scrutinize it in peer review.
I mean, people are prepared to criticize the pseudoscience that's used in things like religion or New Age type beliefs. So, I mean, what would you say is a good metric for decide?
When it comes to pseudoscience, then yes, you can do it easily without having a doctorate in anything, as long as what you're doing is established theory, because you can just read some peer-reviewed papers, or you could put some links to them in order to show that you actually know what you're talking about. As long as you just say that you are not a doctor in this field, I'm not a specialist, then you are being openly honest that you are open to be corrected. But yes, you can easily debunk pseudoscience easily. You don't have to be a doctorate. In fact, people who are doctorates shouldn't try to demolish pseudoscience, because it's a waste of time, in my opinion, sometimes.
This was the whole thing about people like Richard Dawkins getting involved in debate. I think those Richard Dawkins refused to have a debate with William Lane Craig.
Oh, but that was not because of it being useless. It was because William said, he said he justified how God could order the slaughter of the Mennonites. He justified that, and after that, Dawkins said he refused to talk with a man like that. Uh, and I can understand
I
that.
I don't blame him. No.
No, debating William Lane Craig, it's annoying as hell.
It's useless because he will put out 1,000 different things and he will claim victory.
Yeah, the funniest thing is if you answer half of his questions, and then you answered them very well, then when it's his turn, he will say, "Well, my opponent didn't answer that question," but he doesn't understand that's not how an academic debate works. It's ridiculous.
Was it Sci-10 Atheist actually put a video about him being vague and pointless?
William Lane Craig. Oh no, sorry. Is that the Seitan Cake guy?
Yeah, the guy that does the funny videos. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's funny as hell.
The moment actually first when I started listening to William Lane Craig in the debates, I actually kind of liked him. But when I lost all hopes and respect for him was when I saw he tried to make his own theory about relativity, how he has a point of reference. And do you know what that reference is, Quantum?
Yeah, I think it
It's
was
God.
God's reference frame, wasn't it? Yeah. There was a debate between William Lane Craig and a physicist, and
It was
I
Sean
mean,
Carroll, I think.
oh yeah, yeah. Essentially, he didn't have a background in physics, so he was trying to argue something that he didn't understand. Um, in many ways, he was just as bad as a creationist, not understanding evolution. I didn't really see much of a difference with William Lane Craig and relativity.
But the funniest thing is he thinks that just because he has written a book called The Philosophy of Time, he thinks he somehow qualifies him as talking about physics and cosmology. I don't know, have you seen the debate with Lawrence Krauss he did?
Yeah, yeah. So go ahead.
And the only thing that he just kept using the same arguments again and again and again, how you couldn't have this and that, you can't have an infinite regress. No evidence at all. And just because he has this philosophical perspective on time, he thinks that qualifies him to make physics into metaphysics. It's ridiculous. Anyone who studies philosophy would immediately know how bad of a philosopher William is. It's insane. Really, really insane.
Oh yeah, I don't think that's in dispute. Because I mean, he tries to use semantics to for everything, like to back up his what's it Kalam argument, and he was just like going over 1,000 semantics to where the point didn't make sense anymore.
He has a number of papers that are accepted, and it's like he's contributed to good like philosophy, I suppose, in a sense. But like the papers he's published, it's got nothing to do with his theology.
Exactly. He is
and nothing
exactly
to do with his Kalam argument at all. And like you said, that doesn't mean that he can, argue physics or have a point to say about physics just because, he's written a paper about something completely different.
It is exactly like Michael Behe from the Creation Institute. Just because you have some papers published that actually supports evolution, then that doesn't mean you can turn around and then say, oh, evolution is not true. No, it doesn't work like that. You need to have a paper out there, but he doesn't have it.
Yeah, it really frustrates me when someone has qualifications and history where they have done particular work that's good or practical in that discourse, and then they want to extend their own biases and their own religious dogma to, it's just what can I say, William Lane Craig.
Well, I've always said, just look at him. Look at that smirky smile on his face and confidence he has. He is a used car salesman. That's what he is. He looks exactly like one. He really, really is.
Yeah.
Good preachers and pastors are, though, aren't they? I mean,
yeah. I have seen some very old videos of him where he used to have hair and a beard. And actually, I think, doesn't he have Parkinson or something? Because he's always shaking. Have you noticed that?
I'm not sure about that. I didn't notice that, no.
His hands are always shaking very much. You can see it in the Krauss debate. It's really, really a lot he shakes. But in his young days, he was far more aggressive. He actually seemed like a creationist back then.
Yeah, I've watched some of his older videos. I mean, even his stuff from
Ice cream.
A handful of years ago. But yeah.
Ice cream.
Cheesecake.
Okay.
Ice cream and cheesecake.
Ice cream. Ice cream.
Right, I think. Hello. Well, I think this person's clearly a minor anyway, so I'm going to eject them. Right. Okay. That's okay. That's the first time.
The first
That
troll.
was a comedic,
the first
relief.
time.
That's the first troll, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
it's the first time this show has been trolled. Anyway, what I was going to say was that there are some interesting bits in William Lane Craig's speeches where he actually brings himself to try and defend things like genocide or the murdering of children. I mean that seems interesting to me because I don't believe that is his moral philosophy. He
said, actually, I can quote him on this. He said about the slaughter of the Mennonites and the children and the women were just slain because God said so. To that, he said they were the recipients of an infinite good. That's what he said about that. Just because they got a deal in another life, that's how you can justify murder. That's disgusting.
Well, I think
disgusting.
I think all of this stems from not, conflicting with religion, but conflicting with a person's instinctive behavior to want to continue to exist, because the mind will create any way that it can to think up ways it can still exist, even if those ways are false. So anything conflicting with that, of course, it needs to lash out at.
But that's what doesn't make sense, because then he seems like a fundamentalist, even though he claims he's not, because he would just say, well, that's just not what the Bible teaches or something. He could just nitpick instead and say that his God is bigger or better than the God of the Bible. Lots of Christians do that, but for some reason he doesn't. And that's what really angers me. It would be so much easier for him to just say, well, some of the Bible is very wrong and was probably only made for men in order to control other people. Why can't he just admit that? Then we wouldn't have an argument.
Because his mind won't let him. He's not capable of accepting it.
But is it because he's trying to sell something to other people, or is it only for his own good?
Well, I mean, if I'm honest about this, I don't genuinely believe that William Lane Craig actually believes his own argument. I mean, I'm quite sure that in the same situation that he's been talking about, if he was put in that situation, he wouldn't have done the same thing. I mean, does anyone here actually think that William Lane Craig would be capable of murder? Because I honestly don't. I think the issue is that he has a firmly entrenched dogmatic belief that he's doing everything he possibly can to defend without any second thought. So to do that, he has to say some things that to us would seem reprehensible. But to be honest, I don't think he even believes those.
No, I don't think either. But does he defend it only because of his own sake, or is it because he has a following who pays him money or something, like Ray Comfort, for example? Ray Comfort has a reason not to admitting, for example, all the evidence people have shown him. He keeps dismissing it, like you haven't shown me the evidence, simply because he gets paid to do it. But is that the same thing with William Lane Craig?
I believe that he does believe it, because whenever you see him, he's standing up there so smug. And when people are smug, they feel safe. Like I said, it all boils down back to his mind not being able to accept the truth because it wants to still exist.
So I mean, the thing about this guy is, it's sort of like a narcissistic position as well. I mean, I think everyone is slightly narcissistic, but if you're the head of this sort of following, you have this sort of societal power in a sense, and when people have it, they want to sort of hold on to it. So I think someone that's put decades and decades of effort into a belief system, regardless of whether they were brought up that way or whatever. But if you put so much effort into something and you build yourself up to be almost like a little king on a pedestal, then you're not going to want to come off that. And there's sort of a psychological barrier, even a subconscious sort of barrier to coming off that. So in that sense, it's sort of he's basically stuck there, as is anyone else that's 50, 60 years old and has been doing this sort of thing for decades. I mean, have you ever heard of a famous convert from someone that was quite old and had published a lot of material supporting that belief? I mean, most converts are like 20s or teens or whatever, aren't they? Not like mid-50s, 60s.
That reminds me of a quote from a quantum physicist named Seth Lloyd. He said that in order to progress in a field, sometimes the older people have to die. It's the same thing. He's stuck in.
Sorry, the what people have to die? I didn't quite catch that.
The older people in that field has to die in order for that field to progress.
Okay.
You have, for example, in physics, you have all these older grumpy men who refuses the new theories, but as soon as they die, all the new theories come out.
Well, that's one thing that's an interesting thing, because have you seen the God Delusion documentary?
Yes, I have.
Do you remember the story, about the old professor that absolutely stuck to the scientific point until one day a kid came in and absolutely just disproved him, and the professor goes up and shakes his hand and says thank you. Then, that's it's kind of an interesting point about being wrong and how it's not a bad thing. And that's something I'd like to change with society. That there's this sort of negative connotation of being wrong.
Well, the only place where you learn that is at the universities. That's the only place where that discipline is accepted. If you reach up your hand and because the professor asks you questions and you don't give him the right answer, it's okay. The whole auditorium is not going to laugh at you. It's okay there. That's the only place where I can think of where it is socially accepted to be wrong about something.
Yeah, I'd really love to change that, because it's so awesome if people got to thinking about it. If you're wrong and you accept that you're wrong, you get to stop believing in pointless stuff and move on to better things.
It's the same thing if you correct people if they say a word a wrong way, or they used a wrong definition of a word and you correct them. Most people, they actually feel offended that you correct them, like you're some sort of smarty pants who knows everything. But no, I'm not like that. If someone corrects me, I'm actually grateful, because then I won't look like an idiot anymore. I'm grateful for being corrected.
Yeah.
And I think if I was corrected by someone significantly younger than me, I would not be able to sort of resist the I would guess I would be a little bit irritated, almost involuntary. But what I would try to do is I would try to correct myself. That's definitely a good thing. But I think sometimes it's almost impossible to not be irritated about being wrong. I think it's sort of natural to do it. I mean, what I try to do is I try to challenge all my beliefs to the extent that being wrong is not so important anymore. But I think for many people it's just there's something so it just doesn't feel good. It's such a bad feeling to be wrong, and people don't like it. It's sort of like the hormonal reaction to being embarrassed by something. It's sort of involuntary. You can't help it. People don't like it, and these sort of psychological barriers. They're not. It's not a case of saying why don't you admit you're wrong. It's sort of a case of why, as humans, are we so reluctant to admit that we're wrong about something.
Well, I think that's more or less a learned trait, because when I was in school, I'm not like other people. I would ask a question and it was wrong, and kids would laugh at me. I would wonder why. What's the harm?
Yeah, and you probably ended up with a better grades because you asked a question than they did. That's
Yeah.
usually how it goes. It's always the kid who asks the most question, even though lots of his answers are wrong. He usually get the best grades of his class.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to work that way. I would love to change the that social stigma about being wrong.
Yeah, it just would be nice to know a way to do that.
The only thing I can say from experience is just practice. Actually, it comes from a lot. You have to have been through a lot in the academic arena. You have to made a lot of papers that have not been good. You have to have been wrong in some instances. Most of the time, it has actually come from my days in what do you call gymnasiums for high schools? Is that right?
Are you talking about like the Swiss type system when you say gymnasium?
That's actually a little complicated.
Uh,
Because when I went to gymnasium, it was for 3 years, and after that, I go to university. So I don't know what is that. Is that the same in UK or America? In America, I know they have high school, but how long does high school last?
um,
9 years.
well, okay. So in the UK we have actually I mean I went to 3 schools, but that's unusual because I went to I went to sort of like an infant school. But most people go to a primary school, which is from the age of about 5 to the age of about 11, and then they go to a secondary school, which is compulsory from 11 to 16. Although having said that, the government is trying to change it to I think 19, but at the moment it's everyone goes to a school from 11 to 16, and that's called the secondary school. And then you get GCSEs, which are like the basic qualification that everyone should end up with. And then beyond that, everything is sort of optional. You have like 2 more years at school, which is sort of preparation for university, and then you go to a university for like 3 years and get a degree.
That's not at all like here in Scandinavia. Not at all. Here we start out. Here we start out in kindergarten, and then you stay in school for about 9 years till 9th grade, and then you can either take another course if you don't feel confident enough to 10th grade, or you can go on to gymnasium where you will be there for 3 years, and after that, if you accomplish and get your degree at the gymnasium, then you can move on to the university. So we have 3 schools. We don't have a lot of schools, only 3.
When you
Go ahead, Quantum.
I was just going to ask, when you say degree, is that like a school type qualification? I mean, because in the UK, when someone says degree, it's never referring to a high school qualification. It's always referring to the BSc or.
I don't know. Do you get when you get your BFCs? Do you get a hat or something?
Yeah.
All right. We do after gymnasium. We also get a hat, and then we get a diploma. You know, that says you have completed this and this, and now you're qualified to move on to university.
Okay, so basically the diploma that you get is the equivalent to A levels here. So A levels is the second qualification that you can do in schools. The first one is everyone gets GCSEs. They're compulsory. So basically, people do about 7-8 subjects in various things. It's English, maths, science, compulsory, and then a few others as well. And then they get these qualifications called GCSEs, and then at age 16 they can immediately go into an apprenticeship and get a job, and then this is only at 16. So that's one choice, and about 50% of people elect to do that. The other 50% elect to stay at school until they're 18 for an additional 2 years and get A-level qualifications. And the A-level qualifications are the ones that are the qualifications that's a gateway to university. So a university offer in the UK is conditional on your A-level results.
But does that mean that you have to have all things on A levels, everything from English to history, everything in order to get into university?
No. GCSEs tend to be broad like that, but A levels typically people do most people do 3, some people do 4, and the subjects that you do are related to the subject that you want to study at university. So, for instance, the subjects I did were maths, physics, and chemistry.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
did it. Yeah, I mean, okay,
kind of
so
like the same here, for example.
yes, okay, so you do the subjects that you want to study that are similar to university, and then if you meet the offer, you go to university, and then
That's one of the things I did wrong, because at the gymnasium I studied social scientists, and then when it turned out I couldn't get what I wanted, because here we have to live up of what do we call? We have a standard every year that gets measured compared to how many wants to apply to that study. For example, the highest study is psychology. It is about 11.5, and if you don't have grades at that, you can't get into psychology, and that's what I wanted. And then I had to apply to something else, and then I chose a more scientific field, and that's why I study molecular biology right now. So that's how it is in here. You have to have the grades, not only the classes, but also the grades.
So, I mean, I'm interested to know how does it work in Australia, Mordred? Does what sort of system do you have? Okay, I think he's AFK.
But what do you do to grade papers? Do you use the A, B, C, E measurement, or do you use the number measurement? What do you do to grade things?
Well, it's going to change soon, but at the moment we use the ABC. I mean, there's actually the highest grade you can get is A star, but degrees don't do that.
But how do you compare them internationally? For example, if I wanted to study at a university in England and they had to look at my grades, how would they compare them? Because our system, the lowest grade you can get is minus 0.3, and then you have 0, 0, then you get 4, 7, 10, and then 12.
No, it's completely different. At university, there's a system where there's certain bands, so that you can get.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Sorry, I was just checking my mic.
Okay. Yeah, there's certain bands you can get: a first class, 2-1 class, a 2-2 class, a third, or an ordinary, and basically that's it. I mean, you write your mark on your transcript, but it's completely different in the UK. So you don't have this sort of. I know America has like a GPA, grade point average or something, but we don't do that here. So the thing that your employer sees is the university you went to and the bands that you're in, and basically that's it.
We have basically from high school. I mean, it depending on which high school you go to. Certain high schools are obviously better than others at educating you, I guess. So I mean, certain high schools have better inter scores, that they're called, than others. But basically, you just go to a high school, get an inter score. That inter score determines, which is just basically your year 12 subjects you get graded on and assessed, and then depending on your score, obviously if you want to do things like law and the sciences and things like that, you need a really high inter score initially. But even if you don't get a high inter score, you can sort of go to TAFE like I did and do a pathway TAFE sort of arts course for a year, and then apply direct to the institution, and then you can do other courses like that. But yeah, and there's just there's a people called VTAC, I think, and maybe not VTAC. Anyway, they're just in Victoria, and they take your scores and send your application to different institutions, and you give them preferences, and based on your scores and preferences, it sort of works like that. But not everyone finishes year 11 and 12. There's other options there's like VCAL, which is sort of like a I suppose you get a TAFE. You sort of get some sort of TAFE. Usually it's associated with trades like automotive or something to do with woodwork or metalwork and those sorts of things. Yeah, I don't know. That's a snapshot for you.
Unless you're Amish, in which you go to school for 8 years and they give you an A anyway.
It's the same with the Bible school.
A for effort. Bible
Yeah,
school.
that's right.
The Bible school, yeah. You get the little booklets at Sunday school,
or you can
and
do
it's
like
like circle all of the things that Jesus made, and it's like everyone does really well because you could circle everything and be a winner.
Or you can do like Kent Ham and get a very easy doctorate.
So, since we seem to have reached an actual pause, I'll just propose a new topic. I'm just out of interest. What do people think of this ice bucket challenge? Because there was quite, well, I think it was actually quite an awful video that someone put out apparently about it being a really bad idea because people are just showing off or whatever. I think that's a really negative sort of attitude. I'm interested to know what people think about.
Well, I think it's a good idea, but I'm not sure. Did everybody who did it did they donate to the ALS foundation? Did everybody do that, or did people?
Well,
Or did
people
some
are supposed to. I mean, that's the idea behind it, and most people that I know that have done it have been doing that. And I mean, anything that's sort of, I mean, sure, some people probably did it and didn't donate, but I mean, what
But
did
but, it,
they?
but, it, but it's
What
just
crime is that? I mean,
but it's just that I've seen some videos that said ice bucket challenge, but it didn't say ALS at the start.
Um,
That seems like they only did it for the views, so they could get money for themselves.
I saw
I see.
one guy that did it, but he didn't donate to ALS. He
Yeah,
donated to some
I've seen
other.
lots of videos like that. But it was quite nice seeing that Aaron he did it.
Yeah, it was. I haven't seen Aaron do it yet.
You
Seen
know
quite
who
a
I
few
wanted
others.
to? I really, really want to see Stephen Hawking do it. I really want that.
He has done it. He did it by proxy. So obviously, yeah, he has. But
Cool.
he got his children to do it because obviously he can't really dump cold water over himself because of the pneumonia that he's had. But yeah, Stephen Hawking's done it.
Can you just imagine him saying, "Hello, children. I need you to put the bucket over me."
Well, I'll link to the video in the at some point in the description. But yeah, I mean, I think the vast majority of celebrities have done it.
How much have they?
Ozzy did it. Ozzy's done it.
Yeah, I saw it. It was good because he did it with lake water. I mean, I don't actually.
He did it well. He did it well because he actually explained a bit about. Well, him and his wife both did one, and they both talked a bit about the cause. And I mean, those things work best when people address the cause. I mean, in the action, I suppose. I think. But yeah.
But
So
how
they
much?
did a little
How many
synopsis
money
of it.
have they collected now?
I'm not sure. I
It's
don't know.
it's 70. Well, the figure I've heard is $17 million, which is I think is
That is
something.
incredible.
It's something like 10 times more than they collected in 1 year. It might even be more than that. It's a hell of a lot. But let's bear in mind that a single feature-length movie is probably going to gross more. So I mean, it's sort of. We still, I mean, the people. I mean, this is the point that Dark Matter 2525 made. The point was that to the people that are complaining about people doing it just for sort of vanity exercise, they should be aware that they collectively spend more when they go to see a film than people are raising for charity. And then at the end of the day, even if it is a vanity exercise, it's still raising a lot of money for charity, and that should really be the important thing.
Well,
Sure.
I think it's a good thing that they made a contest sort of out of it. Who can do the most, who can, because people are very vain. Let's face it. We're the center of our own universe, and if it helps them get attention while helping other people, I'm all for it. I mean, as long as it's safe, I don't really care.
Yeah,
Well,
if the collateral damage is a few, I don't know, a few freeloaders. I mean,
Well,
still worth.
it's actually good that we have some people who didn't donate because they still made a video and the search engines search word will go up. So they're actually helping even though they didn't donate. They are helping the traffic on the other videos. So it's still better than nothing.
In terms of valid objections to it, the water thing is one. I mean, okay, so for most places this doesn't apply because of course because of course you're wasting a small amount of water. It's going to go back into the water table anyway. But some parts of California have, I think, are in drought conditions at the moment. So I can understand why people might decline to do it on those grounds. And actually, there was a news anchor that decided that basically said he was going to donate, but not actually do the water because of that. Although, again, at the end of the day, people are wasting more water showering anyway, so I'm not even sure it's a valid objection. To answer your point about collateral damage, I think there have been a couple of deaths actually. Mostly due to people going over the top with it. Increasingly more daring stunts, like you were saying, the sort of competitive nature. There was one incident where someone got one of those, those airplanes that drop water to put out forest fires. Someone got one of those and did it as an ice bucket challenge, and of course the guy that was underneath it got injured.
Of course,
Did they forget to break up the ice?
Oh man.
He could have easily have been crushed by the weight of the water. Of course, he's get hurt.
Oh, I thought someone forgot to break up the ice before they dumped it over his head.
There was, I think there's only been one death that's directly attributed to it, though. I mean, what happened was someone did the ice bucket challenge and then drank an awful lot of alcohol, and I think, the small medical danger of it is that when you pour cold water on your head, you go into cold shock, and the cold shock Dr. Quantum, you'll probably understand this better than me, doing biology. Does it cause vascular constriction or something?
It depends how cold it is, and it can vary from person to person. For example, I sometimes I take a bath in the winter in my pool. I know it sounds crazy. I bathe in the winter. I do, but it is because it helps the blood circulation. So I jump in water that's only 4 degrees. Oh no, it's Celsius. I'm sorry to Americans. I can't calculate into Fahrenheit and such. So you have to do it yourself.
I think that's
Celsius is good.
About 36, isn't it? 36, something like. No,
I don't know.
36.
I use the metric system.
Yeah.
But no, I don't see how could that kill you immediately. I don't, unless you are very old or you have a heart condition. So all the blood immediately goes to your heart. That can cause that your heart shuts down. It's the same that happens if you have hypothermia and you get warmed up too fast. You can actually get a heart attack that way also. So there's always that one guy who has to fuck it up for everybody, and that's why there's probably always one guy who has to die in those events. It happens all the time. It's ridiculous. But what did you expect out of over 6 billion people? Of course, there has to be one person who does something stupid.
I think I'm sure there's a name, there's a theory, some sort of stupid theory, or something where it's like, if something's, stupid, any possibilities possible in a sense, I guess. So, if you can possibly die from water being brought on a human in some way, in some conditions, it's going to happen.
Well, you can die of nearly everything. You could die of drinking too much water, eating too much salt. You can die of everything basically if you do it in a stupid way.
Yeah, I think the thing is when people just go too far. I don't think there's really anything that dangerous about just putting cold water over your head in a bucket.
There is not.
But on the other hand,
I think this sounds a little ridiculous the way we're going on about it. But it's crazy.
Well, the reason we go on about it, Mordred, is because there's only 2 things that are probably infinite in this universe. The one thing being the universe, maybe the other thing being the stupidity of man.
Stupidity.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that there were some people, Christians, saying that it's like a surprise baptism or something, and it's satanic?
I heard about that.
What is satanic? Come on.
The ice bucket challenge is supposed to be satanic.
It's supposed to be good, cleansing, new beginning. It's ninja baptism, if anything, So they should, I could imagine a church saying something ridiculous like just stand behind people doing ice bucket challenge and just quickly lay hands on them as soon as they've done the ice challenge. And just go, touch them, Heavenly Father. Yep. Oh.
Actually, it's probably far more healthier to get the ice bucket than being actually baptized, because the baptized water is not that cold. It's actually room temperature. So there's probably some bacteria in there. There's not a lot of bacteria in the ice water, so it's actually better. There have been a lot of children who have been very sick after they've been baptized in a lot of churches.
Really, I didn't.
There's something about the quality of the water.
What sort of things did they get sick with? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no. Was there another? Was there something else from? What else was covered on the Magic Sandwich Show?
Well, I was trying to watch through it. I was trying to watch through it. I remember the bit where I went on, but I think I
stole the show.
Apparently not. But I think it was mostly about the New Covenant group. I mean, I did watch that episode when it came on. I didn't watch all of it because it was something like 3 o'clock in the morning. But did anyone watch that, the New Covenant?
I've watched some of it.
I watched the Concordance Aussie. I watched the Concordance Aussie and Dr. Jones sort of dialogue.
But I have also watched some of it, but I can't really be bothered. I think seriously, I think it's so fucking boring. I really think it's boring. There's nothing interesting, really. I'm sorry. It's not because I have a very short attention span. Not at all. It's just it's not fascinating topics to me. It's metaphysical jumble jargon to me. It really is. For me, that kind of debate is like when people who are not into Star Trek, they watch Star Trek. That's how it is. That's exactly how I can describe it.
Nah, Dr. Spock, he's the best. I don't watch Star Trek, if you couldn't tell.
But I don't know why was it exactly that they chose to debate them. Is it because they want to convert them, or what is it? Is it just to have a debate for the debate's sake, or what is it? What is the purpose?
I thought. I mean, I don't know. Ozzy always talks to this better, but I mean, the reason he likes talking in there and stuff like that is because it feels like it's like gets through to individuals who may have dogmatic. I mean, it's sort of there for people who have dogmatic religious beliefs, and to hopefully get them into a sort of discussion with people who are also religious but don't have dogmatic religious beliefs, and with people who aren't religious, and show sort of commonalities. I suppose it's only interesting if you're interested in that sort of thing. And
but that is
like
the
you say. I mean, I don't watch a lot of it. That's I mean, a lot of it I find boring. I mean, I watched when Concordance went on because it was the first time he went on there, and I mean, Concordance has some interesting things to say, and Aussie's interesting to listen to as well. But yeah, I don't know.
But if the demographic is younger people who are probably fundamentalist or into this debate sort of thing, then it shouldn't be that long. It should be compressed down into small bits, because most people don't sit down and watch a 2 to 3 hour video on YouTube, especially.
Are you kidding? I could watch hours of the same cartoon when I was younger. I don't think attention span is a problem.
Sure, but we are talking about philosophical debate. I mean, come on, how many people are going to sit down and listen to this 3 hour debate about philosophy? Not a lot of people.
Actually, quite a lot of younger people nowadays are into philosophy. You'd be surprised. Even the religious crowd are more into philosophy. So.
But the video doesn't have to be that long, because a lot of the topics and the question and answers, they can be summarized so much easier. I think sometimes it drags on too long. They are, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I just think it's dragged on. I don't know why. And it's not because I have a short attention span. Not at all. Not at all. I just think it's Yeah, it's just too much, too much.
For those that did watch it, do you have like a review that you could offer for it? Was it? I mean, I'm talking about the Aussie concordance thing.
I mean, again, it's long-winded, I suppose, to get across a few points, key points, I suppose, it felt. Um, but, I mean, I enjoy listening to Ozzy um, make his points anyway, and same with Concordance. So, I mean, I found it interesting, if only mildly. But yeah, I don't know what else to really say about it. He was just sort of talking in a more general sense about how, science is sort of in many ways the scientific sort of practice is a courageous act in a sense to challenge all your ideas to be wrong, like to test all your ideas to see if they're right, rather than where we see with dogmatic religion, where it's you have an idea or a concept and you're saying it's right, and then you're working backwards. But I mean, that was the crux of his main point, and the thing was 2 hours long. But yeah, he said more and spoke to more topics, but yeah.
Yay!
There's Ozzy.
Yeah.
Ozzy can make an account of himself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Ozzy.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah. We were talking about the New Covenant group concordance, and you on the. I mean, we had a few people give an opinion on it. What did you think of that discussion?
Oh, the discussion you were having about it?
Oh no, I mean the one that you had on the New Covenant group.
Oh, well, I enjoyed it. I didn't hear the conversation that you were just having, so I can't respond to anything that might have been said there. I was right in the process of uploading the video, which is why I wasn't able to join you at the start of the show. Yeah, I enjoyed the conversation. I'd like to hear more of what Concordance has to say on the idea of scientific courage and sort of epistemological courage, which is what he was talking about. I'd sort of like to hear him develop that idea. And one of the fellows who was on that show, who sort of was on the panel who set this up, got the ball rolling, has suggested that to him, that maybe he should prepare a formal lecture or a video or something about that. So I'd like to hear him say more about that. The reason I'm interested in that is because I happen to be of the opinion that science has values, that there are values intrinsic to the discipline of science, and that science is not value-free. And I think intellectual courage is in fact one of those.
Yeah, I mentioned that he sort of made the point about the scientific process being being looked at as being courageous because you are challenging the fact that your idea is wrong potentially all the time, to try and find out what is the right answer, so to speak. Yeah, I think that's all we were sort of talking about. We just happened to mention it. I don't even know why we got onto the Covenant group actually.
What actually is scientific courage? I did watch the podcast, but I confess I can't really remember what.
Oh, well, it's the idea that science, that one of the scientific values, one of the values of science, is hypothesis testing. But hypothesis testing is not something that for the faint of heart. It's not something for people who are timid. You can't be intellectually timid. You can't be the type of person who plays hide the ball with your views and who seeks to build a hedge or a fence around your ideas. When you come up with a brilliant idea in science, or just even a little slightly clever hypothesis, even when you're doing your dissertation in front of a people who make it their business to shred your ideas, that's what they're going to try to do, right? I mean, it really is a harrowing experience getting a higher education, getting a graduate degree, and it's especially so in the sciences because that process never stops. It doesn't stop after your dissertation or something like that. People are always looking to find flaws in your methodology. They're always looking for inferential failures and leaps in your conclusions and your findings. They're looking for other ways of interpreting the data that you've never considered. There are people who are always going to be abreast of data that's just forthcoming that you didn't have access to that can be used to rebut your work. And so it takes a certain amount of courage to go out there and devote an enormous amount of effort and dedication and time to put an idea out there, only to be met with what in any other circumstance would be considered hostility. I mean, if you went to a party and said, "Hey, I had this idea for a play I want to write," and everyone said, "Okay, well here, we're not going to say what's good about it. We're just going to try to shred it," right? You would think that this was a terrible thing, but in fact, this is what goes on in the sciences. Is people try to shred your ideas, and that takes guts, and it's built into the scientific enterprise. Is this value?
That's sort of a difficult thing to go through because it doesn't, even if you write or you do a lot of research, like let's just use an example. If they were a molecular biologist and they went out, they got their grant, they did their experiments, and they wrote down their article with a few other of their colleagues, and even if their findings, can be repeated multiple times, no matter what, it's always on peer review pretty much up until the end of time, as far as we're concerned. Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Did anybody hear what I just said, or?
Yeah.
No, I agree with what you said.
Yeah, I didn't find anything to disagree with there. I'm curious though, Quantum, did I actually address your question properly? Did that make sense?
Oh yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I watched about the first half of it, so I did go through this, but I'm finding it difficult to remember all the terms that we went through. Well, during the last Magic Summer show, you were talking about scientific courage as well, weren't you? Or am I wrong about that?
No, it came up, but I don't remember exactly the context in which it came up. But yeah, it definitely did come up. In fact, it was kind of odd. I remember when I was on the New Covenant Group Concordance, it was the same day. It was the same evening for our time as the afternoon on which we'd had the Magic Sandwich show, and it felt like there was a real continuity from one show to the next. I felt like we were just continuing the conversation that we'd started on the Magic Sandwich show. I can't remember specifically what we said on the Magic Sandwich show.
I mean, I can remember the bits that I called in about, rather unsurprisingly. The whole it seems rather depressing that you can be so easily proven wrong, even though that's. I mean, actually, I did actually mean to ask you a question on the Magic Summer show, but didn't get a chance, so I guess I'll ask it now. So I saw a discussion between Richard Dawkins and Thunderfoot, and it was about science and various things like that, and they were talking about what's more important, knowing the truth or being happy, and both of them said knowing the truth. But is it really? I mean, the whole ignorance is bliss thing. Doesn't that make sense? Do you think it's better to in some ways be happy than to necessarily be rational and know that your position is logical?
Well, I mean, if knowing the truth was going to be horrific, then no, I wouldn't want to know it. That's. I mean, I have to be honest. I mean, if I thought that to find out the truth would be the equivalent of being on the rack, or that I would suffer so much psychologically that I would, that I'd want to kill myself or something like that. No, then I'd rather not know the truth. I really rather would not. If that were the price of knowing what the truth was, and that was the truth of it, and okay, no, I'm not. Thanks, I won't take that pill. I'll skip it. I'm enjoying life right now. Yeah, I'd rather not know the truth. Maybe if I'm told I'm about to die and I have a week to live or something like that, then I might say, oh, okay, hit me with the facts. I want to know the truth. I want to go out with my eyes open. But I mean, the stakes are not so high when it comes to the truth, and our happiness, I think, is in large part contingent upon knowing what is the case and being in possession of accurate information. So, it really never comes down to happiness versus the truth. I mean, that's almost always a false dichotomy. So it's an interesting thought experiment because it's a way of sort of getting you to sort of index your values. Which value is higher to you, your own happiness and well-being, or your commitment to being in possession of the facts? But I mean, ultimately, I have to admit, I think that intellectually, nothing is more sacred than the facts. Nothing's more important than sort of being in possession of the facts to the best of your ability. Nevertheless, our interest in having the facts and being right and having the truth, the whole motivation for that is because our happiness and our well-being rests upon not making mistakes all over the place.
Did someone
It's
else
interesting.
want to make?
I think it's
go
important.
ahead.
I did.
Yeah.
I'd have to say that no matter what the truth was, no matter how horrible, no matter how hard it was to take, I'd want to know it. I'd want to know how to work, so I could work through it, so I can solve the problem. Even if I couldn't solve the problem, at least I know that I tried. I didn't stand by and.
Yeah, I'm the same actually. If the truth was so painful that I would probably die or get a lot of psychological pain from it, I would probably choose it anyway. I think I will, because truth matters to me. It does. It just does so much.
Why does it matter?
But could we have it in the context of a sort of a more moderate context? Because you could always argue that, if there's the whole mafia thing. If you know the mafia exist, then they're going to come and kill you. But it's not so much that if you know it's not so much about your life being in danger or something. It's more the sort of religious people. I think the studies have shown that religious people are in general slightly happier than non-religious people because of the sort of comfort of heaven, that sort of thing. So I'm talking more about an overall lifestyle rather than this particular scenario. That if you are privy to the knowledge, then
I'm also.
So
I think. Yeah. Sorry, Quantum. I'll let you.
Oh no, go ahead. I think I made my point. Yeah.
I just wanted Dr. Quantum to be able to, speak.
No. I'm also talking about my lifestyle, because for me, knowing the truth also makes me happy. If that makes sense, the search for knowledge and truth is what drives my life. That's why I chose to go into molecular biology. It empowers me and enriches me as a person. It makes me happy, even though if I can't manage to know the truth, but it's the search for the truth that matters to me. That's what makes me happy. I'm not happy sitting back in my chair and thinking, oh, somebody else might figure it out. No, I'm not that at all. Not at all.
But hang on, Dr. Quantum, there's something odd there, though. You said that, the quest for the truth and knowing the truth is what makes you happy. But precisely what's at issue is, what if being in possession of the truth, or the very quest for the truth, immiserated you? What if that didn't make you happy?
That doesn't matter, because the fact that I know the truth is what makes me happy, even though the truth is horrible. I would rather believe an uncomfortable truth than believing a beautiful lie.
No, that's not what's at issue. I hope that's not what's at issue. If the issue is simply, would you rather believe a falsehood if it brought you some discomfort than that brought you some happiness, rather? Would you rather believe a falsehood that delivered with it some happiness? No. I mean, presumably it's not that kind of case, right?
What, you're thinking I'm a masochist or what?
No. But I think that, I mean, we all look to. I mean, look, anyone who's ever suspected that their spouse is cheating on them, okay, and has hired a private investigator, okay, is determined to find out the truth, even if the truth is going to be excruciatingly painful. So, I mean, that is emotionally and psychologically devastating to find out that your spouse is cheating on you, okay, presuming you value fidelity in your spouse. Now, so people all the time value the truth over their happiness, right? So, but I think the question can't just be that, because the answer, almost everyone's going to say, yeah, I value the truth more than happiness, in that trivial sense. The question, though, I think the deeper question, the more important question, the one that interests me at any rate, is why do you care about the truth? And is it not because it conduces to happiness? And it isn't just because you know the truth. Yes, it is. Yes, it is intellectually gratifying and intrinsically satisfying to know what is in fact happening. But I think that the reason we have that hunger, what's sometimes called epistemic hunger, is because being in possession of the truth allows you to navigate through the world and get what you want and satisfy your interests and your needs and your desires. And that's why we care about truth in the first place. It's why we're not indifferent to truth in the first place. It's why even your dog wants to know where you hide the snacks, right? Your dog wants to know the truth too, so far as it's able to, right? I think the reason is because being in possession of the facts means you're able to actually negotiate with the world in a way that works. And if you are not in possession of the facts, you're going to be hitting your head against a wall an awful lot of the time and not satisfying your interests and your needs and your desires.
Well, I just want to put out, maybe it's not necessary always to know the truth. Let's just say someone puts a link into a chat room that you're in, and they say pony love. Is it necessary to know the truth of what's in that link, or where that link is going?
I'm sorry, I don't actually understand the example.
Well, is it necessary to follow that link and see where that is, to know the truth, what's behind the link, or is it or can you just assume that it's something you don't want to have a mental image of?
It doesn't. Yeah, I think the truth doesn't have to be. I mean, if we're talking the truth in the sense of like the truth about reality, like why we're here. I mean, if it doesn't impact my life, I mean, it wouldn't matter what the theory of everything was. I don't think in my own head it wouldn't stop me from sort of pursuing the things that I pursue and experiencing life and enjoying it for what it is, regardless of how it came to be this way.
Well, it seems
sort
to
of thing. But I mean, in terms of, I mean, I think Ozzy's sort of talking more, like the truth, as in like as a, I guess more of a philosophical term.
Ozzy, I might be strawmanning you here, Ozzy, but correct me if I'm wrong. It seems to me that you're kind of talking about. You said, why do we have this urge for the truth? Why do we seek it? That's correct. You said that.
Yeah. Why are we even concerned about having true beliefs?
Okay.
Why do we care that our map of reality is accurate in the first instance?
Okay.
Well,
okay.
I think there's a good reason, but yeah, go ahead.
Yes, but okay. So you were talking about kind of like the purpose behind it. All right. Well, to that I can only say, well, there is no particular reason why we do it. It's only because we have chosen to do it. That's why I am a niche follower. I do read some philosophy, even though I sometimes take the Krauss stand on it. Sorry, Ozzy.
That's okay.
But I take the existentialistic approach. I'm first for knowledge because it's just what makes sense to me. It's my purpose I have found in life. It's I can't put it any way else than that, because there is no purpose to it other than if it makes you have it, then it's probably for survival things, like we need to find some new vaccines in order to survive, so we need to go and investigate further. That's the only purpose in there, but when it all comes down to it, there is no essential purpose to it all. Nothing.
I think that the purpose behind our valuing of the truth is much more basic than that. Um, if your model of reality is not tracking reality properly, you simply will not survive. You won't know when to chew. You'll be chewing when there isn't food in your mouth. You'll be running away from things that are not dangerous. You'll be pursuing things that are not prey. You'll be pursuing something that's not a mate, right? I mean, your senses, right? Even your physical senses, these are detection devices. These are tracking devices. What they do, your senses, your eyes, your ears, your sense of touch, all of these things, these are things that systematically co-vary with changing states in your environment. Your body is a truth machine. It is your body and your brain are designed to make sure that you have mental experiences that reflect, at least to some degree of accuracy, what's going on around you. Um, if an organism can have behaviors, it can have behaviors that conduce to its survival or inhibit and interfere and impede its survival. And so it's important that organisms have sensory organs. Organisms have sensory organs precisely so that they can respond behaviorally in ways that are appropriate to their circumstances to allow them to survive and procreate. And so I think the reason we value truth is, I mean, our concept of truth and and all of that is really just an extension, an extrapolation of simply accurately representing reality around us. Science is just sort of a systematic, trans-individual, culture-wide extension of quite natural capacities like reasoning, seeing, hearing, touching, all of these things that allow us to track reality. So I think that it's quite innate in us to be concerned with the truth. And there are reasons why we're concerned with the truth. It's because of the kinds of critters that we are. If we were immortal, if nothing could kill us, if nothing could hurt us, if nothing could affect how many offspring we had, if no matter what, you were born, you would never die, and you'd have 2 offspring. You couldn't have more, you couldn't have less. Okay? It wouldn't matter what kind of body you had, right? It wouldn't matter what you did and what you didn't do, right? If you were right, your body would not have to track reality because from the standpoint of natural selection and evolution, there's no differential reproductive success. You're not dying off. You're not having more or less surviving offspring than the other one. It's precisely because of things like differential rates of reproductive success and that you can die, and you can die before you live to reproduce, and you can out-reproduce others, that you have the kind of body that you have, and that you have the kind of concerns and interests that you have, including a concern and an interest in getting the facts right. So that's how I see it. So I think it's actually trickled into us. I don't think it's something we choose.
I'm sorry, but wouldn't that make the truth relative, if that were the case?
I don't see how that would make the truth relative. I mean, what it would mean is that the truths that concern one organism can be different from the truths that concern another organism, right? I mean, the things that concern a sponge, well, there's not much that it's like to be a sponge. I don't think there's much that is of concern to a sponge, but even a sponge has interests, even though it doesn't know what its own interests are. But what is of concern to an eagle and what is concern to an octopus and what is of concern to me are different. So the truths about which we are concerned are going to differ depending on the kind of organism we are and the kind of environment that we inhabit. So that's true. But whether or not something is true, I think but that's a fact that's irrespective of individual. I mean, truth is just whatever is the case, right? Truth is just a relationship between a proposition that describes a state of affairs and the state of affairs. States of affairs are what they are, irrespective of what people think or believe about the matter. So, I mean, I don't see how the truth can ever be subjective. Beliefs can be subjective. A belief is just your belief. But the object of your belief and whether your belief is true, that I think is by definition an objective matter always. But what we're not is in a position to know that our beliefs are correct, right? We have reasons to think that our beliefs are correct. We have reasons to be suspicious that a certain belief is incorrect, which is why belief admits of degrees of confidence. But I don't think that the fact that our concern for truth is a byproduct of evolution means that truth is going to be subjective, or that even our concern for truth is going to be subjective. It just means that from one organism to another, the objects about which they are concerned, the truths about that are of interest to them, will be different depending on the kinds of critters that they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Can I briefly
think
ask a sort of thought experiment type question? I'm just wondering how the outlooks would change, because you talked about how reproduction comes into this, and I'm just out of interest. Some species die when they reproduce. I'm just wondering, what, as an intelligent, self-aware species, what the state of affairs would be if humans actually could only only maybe one sex brought up the children, but instead of passing on our knowledge to our children, we died before we got to do that, or at least half of us did. What difference would that make? I mean, some species do that, and I mean, there's an interesting book about this fiction, science fiction about this sort of idea.
Well, I mean, if you die before you can communicate or transmit what you know to other organisms, then that means every generation starts fresh. Every organism starts fresh. You know, if there's no lateral communication, if I can't pass on even to the people right around me right now, next to me, what I know, then what I know dies with me, and then every individual starts afresh. And so what that means is you couldn't get much of an accumulation of knowledge, except to the extent that that knowledge was essentially instantiated and incorporated right in your physiology and right in your brain state. So you'd sort of have to be born knowing things. Like there are certain things that we're born knowing. You know, we're born knowing that we can move our bodies, right? We're born, and what I mean by that is we're born with the capacity to know that we can move our bodies. That's an innate capacity to know that you can move your body, and that, and eventually well, there's a whole pile of capacities that you have that are just sort of innate, that you don't have to learn, that you just come equipped with. We learn that we can walk on our legs and not on our hands, but it's not like any child ever got confused and thought, oh, geez, I should be walking on my hands, and had to be taught to walk upright on its legs rather than doing a handstand, right? We're just sort of, we're born with certain innate dispositions and capacities. Those dispositions and capacities that we're born with constitute a kind of knowledge, if you will, but that's knowledge in a very attenuated sense. So, I mean, if you couldn't transmit knowledge downwards to your offspring or laterally to the people next to you, then there wouldn't be any accumulation of knowledge in the relevant sense that we're talking about. It couldn't be science, for instance.
I gotta kind of contest that whole the body just knows, because it's, you know, when the baby's born, the brain tests certain stimuli in the body, certain receptors, to see how things work. We don't instantly know how to move our arms or whatnot. It's just the brain working out and trying to figure out how to what works by stressing certain stimuli.
But it's not conscious knowledge. We're not talking about conscious knowledge here, right? I know how to use my eyes. I was not taught how to use my eyes, right? Right? Does that make sense? There are conditions under which, I mean, you could put me in such a deprived condition, a stimulus-deprived condition in infancy. You could have put me, when I was an infant, in a condition with a little light or weird visual circumstances, such that my eyes would never properly function. My visual cortex would never have developed properly. The right neural connections would never have happened, right? So there's a certain sense in which that's learned. But that's like saying that a bird learns to fly. No, there's a time in its life when it can't fly, and there's a time in its life when it can fly, and it learns to fly, but that is an innate capacity that it has. It has an innate instinct to fly and to try to fly. It doesn't, for instance, try to spin its wings. It tries to flap its wings, right? Um, uh, so this is a knowledge. It's not a representational knowledge. It doesn't think to itself, okay, in order to fly, what I've got to do is I've got to hop up here, and I've got to put myself in this position, and I've got to flap my wings, and then I've got to leap, and no. That's not how organisms ever learned how to fly, and it's not how you learn to walk.
You do know that the mama bird teaches the baby bird how to fly. I mean,
Yeah, yes, she does teach the baby bird how to fly, and but if you take the mommy bird out of it, the babies actually learn how to fly later.
they
Okay.
might, but they,
Well,
just
they
because
do.
they have these things doesn't mean they'll know how to use them.
No,
Well,
but
let me give you. Let me give.
but what he's trying to say is that they can't learn it before they have developed the ability to learn it. They developed the wings yet completely, so they wouldn't even be able to learn it even if the mother bird tried it. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, here's one thing to keep in mind. Okay, I'll give you an example in our own culture. Okay, in our own culture, sort of in the West, for instance, it's very common for parents to try to teach their kids how to walk. You'll see parents do this. The toddler is like at the sort of crawling stage and the standing up stage and the sort of tottering, barely standing. And you'll see parents, they'll grab their kids by their hands and they'll walk over them and they'll help the kid walk, and they think they're teaching the kid how to walk. Okay, and this is all for nothing. It's absolutely purposeless. They are, in fact, teaching the kid how to walk, but it is absolutely redundant. The kid will walk with or without any parental assistance. Okay? And it's the same with language. You don't even have to talk to your children for them to learn a language. There just has to be language around them. They just have to be exposed to a language, and they will learn. You didn't learn your language from your parents. Well, you did in the sense that they were the linguistic community that you were exposed to, but you just had to be exposed to a linguistic community. In the absence of an exposure to a linguistic community at the right time during a certain critical window in the early years, you won't learn language. So I mean, if you're 8 years old and you've never been exposed to language, you're never going to learn language. Okay, your ability to communicate is going to be horribly crippled. Okay, it's not like learning a second language. Learning your first language, I mean, an infant learns more words in a day than you could trying your hardest by pouring through a dictionary. Okay, the rate at which our brains are able to pick up the meaning of words is amazing. Oh, and by the way, nobody defines words around children. You never have to tell your 3-year-old the meaning of the word is such and such. This is the meaning. If you said the meaning of the word, the kid wouldn't understand what you're talking about. The kid doesn't have the concept of the word meaning yet, right? We don't define our words. We just talk around them and they just pick it up, right? Look how hard it is to do that. Go immerse yourself in another culture and see how easy, it's not easy, to pick up a language casually. But your children that know almost nothing about the world are able to do it. And it's because they're wired up to do it. Just like they're wired up to walk and just like birds are wired to fly. So it's not that instruction and modeling is not relevant, doesn't accelerate the process and improve the process and make it better. But these are not strictly learned things. These really are innate capacities that we have.
You can see that
There's
with
a number of examples in psychology. A number of examples in psychology and to do with children as well, not just walking and also talking, but they're good examples. But I mean, there's a lot of other things and early development, previous things that babies have, like certain reflexes that babies do, which previously evolutionarily would have served, a purpose and would have, probably led to, some sort of, I don't know, action that would be, productive for humans to survive. But they're not, the baby doesn't know, again, what it's doing. It doesn't have to have the knowledge of how to do the reflex. It's sort of a natural innate thing. So it's sort of a percentage of things that we sort of do, or that the creatures do, and that humans as well. Seem to do that. Seem to that is say innate inside.
There are.
Nature versus nurture, in a sense.
Am I hearable?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wanted to get across that, I think that language, it's more of a trial and error. I mean, if you've ever heard a baby babbling, that's their brain trying to figure out what it is and relate it. I mean, of course they're going to get it eventually, but it's not. I don't think it's inherent within them. I don't think it's a inherited trait like
Well, okay.
some.
Well, I'll
I
refer you
want
to literature.
I want to
I
point
would.
something out. There
Sure.
are some interesting historical cases of wolf children, children that lived with wild animals till a certain age. I don't recall the age. I thought it was around 8 or 10 years old. That if they have lived in the wild all those years and they hadn't learned a language, then at some point the brain stops the process, and those people are not fully capable to learn a language. So if they haven't, so the kid is like 10 years old, they will never be able to pick up a language
Yeah.
ever again.
It's
Yeah.
called a critical window. Yeah, there's a window during which you have to learn this. But the cat's eye, what I would suggest you do is, I mean, look into this because this is really considered settled science at this point. I mean, linguists and people who work in the field of child development have established fairly conclusively that children, in fact, do have this innate capacity. I mean, you can't even. I mean, ask yourself this. I mean, people. Part of the reason people think that we teach our children language, um, literally teach them, is because they have really a failed theory of what language is. People think that words are names for things, right? Because, like, the word cup is a word that refers to a cup, and laptop is a word that refers to a laptop, and star is a word that refers to that thing in the sky, and stuff like that. And we think that words are sort of, most of our words are like that. That most of our words are like nouns, that they're names for things, right? This is called the reference theory of language. That the meaning of a word is the referent, and so the way you teach language is you point to the referent, you point to the cup, and you say cup, and the kid associates the sound cup with the object, the cup, and they go, oh, and there's this association going. So if people assume that it must be associative learning. Well, that's the kind of learning of words that happens when you're much older, and there is some of that happens in childhood. But you got to remember that there's a lot that goes on in language. Okay, what do we do with our language? We don't just name things. We have words like prepositions: to, of, from, with, at. They do not have a referent at all. Think of the word the. What is the referent of the word the? It doesn't have one, right? A huge number of words in our language have a function. They have a use. They're like moves in chess. You do things with words, and we don't just name things. We're not just describing things. We ask, we tell, we order, we question, we interrogate. Now, let me give you an example. Supposing if you have a dog, I don't know if you have a dog, but if you ever point at something with a dog and you say dog, and you look, and you point at something, the dog never looks where you're pointing. The dog just stupidly looks at your arm, and that's because the dog doesn't understand what we call ostension, to indicate. Okay, the dog doesn't understand that. He just dumbly looks at your arm. You have to actually train your dog to figure out what pointing is, and you do that. It's very difficult. You have to actually get your dog to understand, to look where you're looking, and to associate where you're looking with where you're pointing, and eventually, on a kind of shortcut, you can point, and your dog looks where you're pointing. That actually takes training. It doesn't happen accidentally.
I did that with my cat.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, people who train dogs learn this, but you'll see people all the time pointing at something while looking at their dog straight in the face. It's the last thing you should do. The dog's never going to look anywhere except by luck in the right direction. The dog's never going to associate the act of pointing, and that's because the dog doesn't have a concept of indicating, of ostension. Ostension is a linguistic act. You can do it with a gesture, or you can say, hey, look at this, and turn your head, and people look to see where you're looking. So how would you teach a child that you are naming something as opposed to asking. For instance, if I hold up an object and I say a word, Quatlu, how does the infant know that I'm naming an object as opposed to giving an order or asking a
Experience?
question? And well, no, but it doesn't have any experience of what asking is and what ostension is and what questions are and what orders are and what scolding is. But a child comes equipped with these mental categories. Okay, that's the magic of it, right? Language, first of all, isn't names for things. It includes names for things, but most of our words are not even names for things. We tend to think that words function like nouns, okay? But I mean, ask yourself, what is the meaning of the word this? What is the referent of the word this? Well, the referent of the word this is whatever the hell you're pointing at when you say this. It doesn't have a referent. It has a use. It has a function, and that's how language is learned. Children suss out the function, but it's only because they have certain capacities, which is why you can't teach your dog. It's not just that there isn't enough neurophysiology. It's that it's not the right kind of neurophysiology. The neural architecture for these conceptual categories is not there, and it is not a teachable thing. Just like I can't fly by flapping my wings.
So you're saying that babies have a heightened neural capacity?
No, they have the opposite of a heightened neural capacity. What they have is neural hardware, a neural architecture that allows them to learn this stuff really, really fast. A child will learn its first language faster and with less stimulation, less instruction than it will ever learn another language. You could learn 50 languages, okay? You could be the greatest translator in the world, and the next language you pick up, you will not learn as fast as the language you picked up as an infant. The ease with which infants pick up language is staggering. Noam Chomsky sort of used to talk about the poverty of the stimulus that children get, and the torrential verbal output that comes out of them. I mean, children learn words sometimes by one trial. They hear a word used once, and poof, out it comes, and they're using it correctly in a sentence. How the hell is that going on? How does a child figure out what is a verb and what is a noun, right? You didn't ever have to be taught what verbs and nouns were to be using verbs and nouns properly, and tenses, and prepositions. You found that out after you were already a fluent native speaker of your language. You went to school and someone said, oh, by the way, there are these things called nouns and verbs, adjectives and adverbs, prepositions, right? Indexicals. You found out all of this. You found out the complicated breakdown of your language. And yet you were a pre-linguistic idiot when you learned all of this, as all of us were. And it's because you come equipped with the right kind of hardware that is capable of doing this. Your brain is not a general purpose machine. Your brain is capable of understanding language and sussing out meaning because it really has been selected for, and sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, in all kinds of fantastic ways. It's why you're able to see. You don't have to be taught to see, right? You have to have the right stimulation. If you're denied the right stimulation, if you're denied any visual stimulus for long enough, your eyes, although they are working, will never work properly for you because your brain will not have been wired up properly because your brain wires itself in response to stimulation, but it can only respond to certain kinds of stimuli. It is pre-adapted for certain purposes and certain functions. And so it is with language.
Well,
So
basically, language predates grammar, and grammar is the only way to classify the language so we can manipulate it.
Well, I mean, grammar. No one gets taught grammar except when they go to school, right? You learn your grammar after the fact. Yeah, it's a little bit like saying it's like this. It would be like going up to a beaver and teaching a beaver from a blueprint and with a set of instructions. This is how you build a beaver dam. The beaver doesn't need any of that, right?
Yes.
Right? The beaver doesn't need that. A wasp, to make a paper wasp nest, doesn't need a blueprint. We'd need a blueprint to build a wasp nest. We would need to know, what the hell, how do the wasps do this? How the hell do they coordinate themselves and do this? Right? But they don't need that, okay? If I want to build a robot that can walk, I need to know an awful lot about physics and forces and balances and stuff like that. There's an enormous amount that I need to know to be able to program a robot to walk, okay? But your toddler that just can toddle through the room without crashing into everything is somehow able to do this without any instruction at all.
That's because we have an inner sort of a gyroscope ear thing. That's more of a mechanical process of the brain.
No. Everything is a process of the brain, right? That's not what's at issue. And of course, you have something that functions equivalent to a gyroscope, but that is a precondition for being able to walk. That doesn't explain why you're able to walk and not bash into things, right? All a gyroscope does at best is allow you to tell which way is up, right? And when you're tipping over, that's it.
It gives sensory information for the brain to then process.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. It's a feedback mechanism. It works almost like a homeostatic principle. It's sort of updating you on your orientation in space. Here's another one.
The way our brains
That's
interpret
very
the
important
information.
in the ability to be able to walk.
Sure, without
if
it,
you couldn't tell where up was, you could know that you were leaning left or right.
Certainly.
I mean, that's a very mechanical process that you're describing there.
everything is a mechanical process. Right? To say that it's a mechanical process has nothing to do with whether something is learned or something is innate, right? And what we mean by innate is not that experience isn't relevant, right? This is sort of an artificial nature-nurture thing, right? People think, oh, nature means fixed destiny, unchanging, information plays no part in it. That's what nature means. That's false. Nobody who is a nativist who believes that that certain functions are native to our brains believes that. That is sort of a caricature. Okay, and similarly, people who think that learning is crucial to a certain function, or that certain things are cultural and learned, they don't think that we do these things without brains, right? And that you don't have to have some innate capacities for them, right? So I mean, sort of the nature-nurture controversy in public discourse is sort of hilariously.
I gotta ask, when you say innate capacity, do you mean that the brain is structured in such a way genetically that it can just inherently do these things?
Yeah. That is, we have in fact cases of people whose brains are messed up and they cannot do these things, right? I mean, there are people who are unfortunately alinguistic by virtue of anomalies in their brains. It's a tragic thing when it happens, right?
You have people that can see sounds.
Yeah, well, those are synesthesias. That's sort of a weird thing that's going on, a cross wiring that's going on, where when they are hearing a sound, part of the visual cortex is getting stimulated, and so they're having visual experiences in response to different sounds instead of having sensory, auditory experiences in response to sounds. They're having visual experiences, and so they say, well, I'm seeing the sound. Well, they're actually hearing the sound, but the way they are hearing it is through stimulation in their visual cortex, and so they're having flashes of light, for instance, when they hear sounds and stuff like that. Certain drugs can do this, or there's certain hallucinatory drugs that you can take, hallucinogens that can induce these kinds of synesthesias.
And I recommend them.
I don't.
No, I'm not actually. I haven't taken certain psychedelics in that nature, but I just thought that was a funny point to make.
On the issue of the innateness of language, there's a wonderful book by Steven Pinker, who's a linguist and a psychologist. He wrote a book called The Language Instinct, where he talks about this, about how children learn languages. I mean, here's an interesting phenomenon that sort of helps illustrate a point. Has anyone here heard of creolization or Creole languages?
Creole?
I will once you start talking about it, but I couldn't begin to
Okay.
talk to it.
Okay. Well, there are what? Okay.
You mean
There are
like
some.
Louisiana?
Yeah. Creole is an actual language, right? But what happened there is actually something that's happened in many parts of the world. In many parts of the world where people were taken as slaves and thrown together from various cultures, okay, and forced to work on plantations and stuff like that, they were often um, uh, uh, forced to try to speak the language of their owners and masters. They came from different cultures, so they couldn't all talk to one another. So people from a family could talk to people in their own family, or if there was somebody from their tribe or their nation, they might be able to speak to them. But there'd be all kinds of people in the community that you couldn't speak to because they were just, they were from another culture and they didn't speak your language. And so what people do is when people are thrown together from different linguistic communities and forced to live together this way, they do what they can. They, like, they, you get things like franglais. You get French and English people thrown together, and then they just create this hodgepodge of half English, half French, or half Swahili and half French and stuff like that. And so in
Papiamento in the Dutch colonies in South America.
yeah,
Papiamento.
yeah, there were, but what ends up happening is you get these fusions of languages, but they're not a new language. Okay, it's just a mess. Okay, they don't have proper structure, they don't have proper syntax. Um, um, it, it is really quite a mess. Now, these are called pidgins. These languages. Okay, they're pseudo languages. They're not real languages. But the children that grow up in these cultures, something interesting happens to them. They grow up hearing these pidgin languages, and they end up, quite naturally, systematizing them. And they end up speaking what's called a Creole. They end up speaking a language that is obviously derived from the pidgin that their parents have been speaking, and it becomes systematized and rule-based, with grammatical rules, grammatical syntactical structures that allow them to have proper tense, changing the endings for tenses, for instance, and word order mattering, whereas in a pidgin the word order doesn't matter. It can be all over the place. And these pidgins are full-blown languages. They are absolutely languages. They are as rule-based and syntactical and orderly as any natural languages, because they are in fact natural languages. Nobody taught these kids these Creole languages. There were no Creole languages when a Creole language forms. There's no language there to teach them. There's nobody who speaks the new language to teach them. They literally are formulating a language out of a kind of a junkyard of different linguistic bits and pieces. Okay, and this is called creolization, and it's one of the most striking examples of how children's brains are just wired to take these sounds and put them into some kind of structure.
That's interesting, because I saw a documentary not so long ago on the BBC of the Vikings in the United Kingdom, and it basically, what we do not realize, that hundreds of words that we are using today as English derives its origin from Viking language. A lot of words we use all day.
Yeah, well, I mean, languages evolve normally, right? The example of a pidgin turning into a Creole in one generation is unusual. It's extremely uncommon because it's a kind of an unnatural circumstance to take a bunch of people, throw them together, force them to live together. They don't have a language. They confect a kind of crude, crazy pidgin, a hodgepodge, and then their children end up with a full-blown language in one generation. That is an extremely unusual circumstance. But people taking over a group of people, forcing them to adopt another language, or simply two groups of people living side by side, picking up words from another language. I mean, that is absolutely a natural way, right? Loan words, borrowing words from another language, simply because you are spending a lot of contact and are exposed to them and their culture. That is an incredibly normal thing. I mean, consider that the Roman Empire, essentially conquers ancient Greece, and then the language of the language of sophistication and culture for the Roman Empire becomes Greek. I mean, that's kind of a weird thing. You know, you'd think that the conquerors would sort of impose their language. You know, no, that's not what happened. It went the other way. So you had one culture politically dominating and overtaking another civilization, and yet the civilization that got dominated ends up somehow culturally triumphing, linguistically triumphing over its masters. I mean, it's kind of a weird thing how these things happen. But yeah, languages evolve. Nobody invents language, right? A Creole is a kind of a weird case where, you know, poof, in one generation, children of all people who have no model of how to speak this language come up with a new language on their own spontaneously. I mean, it's kind of an amazing thing.
And then we have the dead languages we actually do not use every day, like Latin. Scientifically, of course, it's used a lot, but basically it's a language that has no use in daily life, but still we use it after centuries.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting how some parts of previous language stick with generations, and even the way slang and the way expressions change over time, and how they can be abbreviated, shortened, and then you almost have to retrace its initial root meaning to find what that was, and it's often can be different to what it inevitably gets used for, phrasing and stuff like that.
I mean, the future for languages is quite interesting, because eventually we're going to develop universal communicator type technology. I mean, actually, this technology basically already exists, where you have two people with communicators that I think the prototype exists where the computer translates, and they're not very good, but they do exist. So it'll be interesting to see what happens to language in the future. I mean, the number of languages is declining, so it's very possible that eventually there could be a world language, and if there is ever a world language, it would most probably be English. But it'll be interesting to see what happens to language.
Or Chinese.
Well, I suppose, yeah. I
Only
mean,
the Greys.
if anyone's seen the sci-fi Firefly, I'm sure everyone's has seen that. They actually try and solve that problem. The language of Firefly is English, but if you notice that they often speak Chinese as well. You do hear some Chinese in there as well, and that's sort of like a prediction where the world language is English, but there's still there's a little bit of Chinese in there as well. I think they swear in Chinese.
Is that the same thing in South Africa? Don't they speak Dutch, but they also speak no wait, I think it's Afrikaan. It's a combination of English and Dutch, I think, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah, I
suppose cultures, individual cultures end up sort of having their own sort of taste, I suppose. I mean, we can even see that when you compare just Australia to Canada or to Britain and America. I mean, there's a lot of language that we end up explaining to each other because we don't know the context, but it's relevant to our culture. But so there's that aspect of differences. Even if we were all talking a world language, I just couldn't imagine that it would be identical everywhere. I mean, I suppose the more connected we become, which seems to be the way things are headed with the internet and broader technologies and stuff. But it's just more connection.
But that's interesting, because what language would we then be using as a world language? We in Europe perhaps are tended to think we will be using English, but a quarter of the world speaks Chinese, and the second largest language in the world, I believe, is Spanish.
Yeah, but
I couldn't imagine it.
But you have to understand that it's not the reason it will probably be English is because of the sort of communications technologies that the English civilization has. So I mean, if you go to China,
what children are being led to be taught, really. I mean, and this comes back to what we've been saying about how children are just exceptional at learning a language, and if children around the globe, and this is probably the case, as education is being sort of reached out to broader communities, isolated communities, it's often English, and and they're learning English because they can get jobs and become educated and those sorts of things. So I suppose
Because of video
those sorts of drives. Those sorts of
Also,
drives
I
are
mean,
huge, isn't it? Yeah.
you've got to look at things like immigration and things like that as well. I mean, in the UK, you get a hell of a lot of Chinese students that come to the UK to study in various universities, and of course they have to learn English. And in terms of things like academia, all the papers, well, not all of them, but a good majority of scientific papers are in English. I mean, the language of mathematics is based on the Arabic alphabet. I mean, we don't need. I mean, the Chinese have their own number system, but even Chinese students don't actually use the Chinese number system. They would use the Arabic number system, the one that we use when doing something like mathematics. So I mean, if there ever is a world language, I think the most likely is English. But then again, if China becomes a world power, then who knows? But I mean, the thing about China is the people that speak Chinese are all in China, whereas the people speak English all over the world.
Well, in fact, in China they speak a lot of languages, but the official language, of course, is Mandarin.
Oh yeah. I suppose I've oversimplified it.
Well, I actually agree with you, Quantum. I also think that English will probably be the world language. Also because studies have shown that it is one of the simplest languages to know compared to Chinese.
Well, isn't it also more
People
nuanced?
find the Chinese easier, but most European and Western folks find English a lot easier, especially here in Europe. I myself think that English was much easier to learn.
Well, that's of course
Wherever
because they are brother and sister languages. Because I recall I was very fluent in English even before I got one single lesson at school, because I was watching.
Same here.
Yeah, because 30 years ago I was watching the BBC because of the great science fiction movies they showed every weekend. So I always tuned up to the BBC, and that's basically how I picked up my English. And so then a few years later, when I got to school and the teacher noted from, "Gosh, you're pretty fluent in English."
Yeah, but I also think it's easier to pick up for us because we have a lot of similar words. For example, if you say revolution in French, révolution, you say it in Spanish, révolution. It's the same thing. It's the same word we use because it comes from Latin. So maybe that's why it's easier for us to pick up certain languages, because we have these similarities.
Well, I mean, you could argue though that there are misnomers as well. Like for instance, the word black in English. If you look at the word white in
Blanco.
like you say, and in French it's blanche, and that means white, and in German I think the word for
Weiß.
Yeah,
weiß. Yes, weiß.
I thought English was the more nuanced language, not necessarily simpler, but more nuanced.
well, as far as I can, my understanding is that English is the easiest language to learn, but it's the hardest language to learn well. So English. I I know a little bit of German, and the thing about German is that there are far fewer.
So many rules.
Well, yeah, okay, so in German there are less tenses than there are in English. English is bizarre because it has so many different grammatical tenses. So if you said to someone, just trying to say this example, you might say, want you to go to the shop. If I said that to you, that might be how a foreigner would speak when they start to learn English. Want you to go to the shop. Everyone knows what that means, so there would be no difficulty in communicating. But do you want to go to the shop? It is fairly difficult to understand, because what does the verb to do have to do with it and any of this? There's no reason for it. In fact, the logical way of saying it is the way that the foreigners say it. But the point is that it doesn't really matter, because when people say want you to go to the shop, everyone knows what they mean. So it might be hard to learn English to a really high standard, but to learn English, to learn passable English is actually quite straightforward.
It's the same with when you have to learn when to use whom or who. That's a hard one, I think. When to use whom, that's a hard one. I
still don't know that one.
It's when you address someone who might be reading what you are saying. For example, if you read a paper and you say to whoever it may concern, that's a place where you should use whom. Or the famous title on the Hemingway book, For Whom the Bell Tolls, for example. Those are the only examples I have ever used the word.
It's well, the word whom it's a relic. It's a relic of a time when English used to have
like ye olde.
Well, actually, that's a whole other bag of worms, because it's actually pronounced it's not pronounced ye, it's actually pronounced the. It's just that the letter y.
Really?
Yeah,
audible communication would have reduced that. I mean, the usage of it. I mean, if its purpose is to address someone who may eventually read what you're writing, I mean, as soon as you can record, audible. I mean, we're exchanging ideas audibly, so I mean, we don't have to use whom, I guess. So I suppose maybe that reduced its usage.
Those kind of words derive from very ancient origins, and you still have them a lot in Germany, and they call them naamvallen. I don't know the word in English.
Cases in English. That's what they're called in English. Cases.
We have a few of those still in my language, Dutch, like 's ochtends is a word, and when you would describe it fully, it would say des ochtends, which basically means in the morning, and morning, ochtend is morning, and des is an old word we do not use anymore, only for that word. So it's a leftover from the time we spoke the language a little bit different. Basically, like you have perhaps today still in English, the Shakespearean English and the modern English.
Relics of the past.
Yeah.
Please, I hope everybody starts speaking Shakespearean English. It's so awesome.
Well, I think of it just like when anybody says, "Oh my God," I think that is a relic of the past.
With respect to sort of a universal language, it seems unlikely to me that it's going to be English, although I think it's going to be a descendant of English, because as people have already said here, that English is very, very widely distributed as a language, and it's a very it's a language that is written very widely. A lot of other cultures already use language. It's already a kind of language of commerce, a language of science. I mean, we used to speak of the lingua franca. The French language was the kind of common tongue in Europe for many centuries, and English has become the lingua franca, the common tongue. And so it stands a good chance to be sort of a universal language if that ever comes to pass. But I mean, it's not going to be English as we know it, because it's not going to happen in our lifetime, and probably not in a few lifetimes. And chances are, because English is a language, because of certain peculiarities of its structure, allows it to absorb a lot of language, a lot of loan words. I'm not of the view that English is especially easy to learn. It's easier than some and harder than some, and I don't believe that it's a more nuanced language. I mean, any language that's been around for a long time and has a large vocabulary is incredibly expressive. But English does have the largest vocabulary right now, because it borrows words. There's all these loan words from other languages that it just sort of absorbs. It just slurps them up and takes them on board. Certain other languages, there are certain features of the language or something peculiar to the culture where they resist this. The French, for instance, really resist the adoption and importation of other foreign words into their vocabulary. They like to coin their own French words. When they do, they don't like to borrow other words. So I think English sort of stands the best chance of giving birth to a language that will be a common language. But I mean, it's going to be so different. It's going to sound really queer to our ear, and also like things can change in weird ways. I mean, if you've ever read Chaucer or heard how Chaucer's English was pronounced, I mean, it's unintelligible. It doesn't even sound like English.
What is that? What is Chaucer?
Sorry, Chaucer was an English writer. He wrote the Canterbury Tales very famously, and you can read them in modern translation, of course, in modern English. But when you read them, when you see the text, just look up Canterbury Tales and the Old English that it's written in. It's quite unintelligible, right? It's pre-Shakespearean, and you really cannot figure out what is going on there when you read it in the original. You've got to struggle to get some sense out of what's being said. Not only is it written very differently, but it was pronounced completely differently. So, I mean, if you were to go back to Chaucerian England and listen to what Chaucer spoke, you literally would not hear and understand what he was saying. It would just be so much noise. And yet we are the descendants of this.
That's racist. That's racist.
What's racist?
Oh, it's just you saying it would sound like Nords.
No, I said it would sound like noise.
No, I thought you said Nords.
No. So it would sound like noise. Not Norse. Anyway, so I think that whatever language sort of breaks out as sort of the dominant language in the future will be very different from English, even if it's a descendant of English, because languages keep evolving. They don't stand still. They're always changing, and the meaning of words can change completely. So that even if a word persists for several hundred years, its meaning can be completely transformed. So it just does not mean what it used to mean. So the fact that a word has persisted for a long time doesn't even mean anything. Now, with the advent of the printing press and writing, that introduced a kind of standardization that was unprecedented before. So languages used to evolve and change much more rapidly in the past. You had more geographic isolation. You had less of a concern over standardization. I mean, before the printing press, there really was no standardized spelling at all. If you look at medieval manuscripts in any language, right? I mean, it doesn't matter what language you're looking at. Medieval manuscripts are full of spelling mistakes, and they're full of spelling mistakes because people didn't really have a concept of there's a right way, the way to spell a word. That is a function of the printing press, a standardization. Prior to that, an author would write a word, and if you wrote the word 3 times on the page, you might write it 3 different ways. You just spell it how it sounds, is how it went, right? And it took a long time for us to sort of think of words this way. In fact, prior to the printing press, if you look at old manuscripts, this is kind of a fascinating thing. When we write a word on a page, when you get to the end of the line, if there's not enough room for the whole word, you don't write the word, right? You start the word on the next line, you write it out completely, or you might hyphenate it at a syllable break. Well, prior to the printing press, they didn't do that. You could write a word, and when you got right to the edge of the margin, you just stop right in the middle of the word. If you were writing the word the, you would write T, H, and an E on the next line.
What the hell?
Now that seems nuts, but that's because we think of words as verbal written artifacts. People used to think of words as oral artifacts. A word was a sound. It's not something you wrote. A word was a sound, right? What is a musical note? Well, a musical note to me is a sound, okay? But to a composer, a musical note is not just a sound. It's actually a symbol on a staff sheet, okay? And to us, we have literate minds. So when we think of words, we think of the meaning of the word, the spelling of the word. There was no way to spell a word back then. There was however you spelled it, and that could change from region to region, and it could change depending on your mood. I mean, I can think of 3 ways of spelling the word swan, right? I could spell the word swan 3 different ways. S-W-A-N, S-W-O-N, S-W-A-W-N. I mean, there's all kinds of ways to spell a word, right? Well, that's how people spelled back then, and they didn't think of words as written things primarily. We now think of words as something in a dictionary, a written artifact, which we just pronounce. People used to think of a word as a spoken thing, which there were many ways to write. And they were not particularly concerned about when you get to the end of the line, you finish the word on the next line, even if it was a short word. I saw a manuscript that has a title page that has the word the on the title wrapped around like that. It goes TH and the E on the next line. right? I mean, it's amazing, but that's how it was. And this was at the start of the printing press. This was actually an early manuscript, first one of the first manuscripts that was printed, and that's what they were doing. So they really had no sense of propriety of words as written artifacts the way we do now. Now that's how we think about words, but they didn't think of words that way.
I'm just interested to ask people a question. I've been burning to ask this one. There's been a trend. I've seen people in the atheist community do this, but for like the word atheist, you get people arguing about the definition of the word atheist, that sort of thing. I mean, what's I mean, do people think that's I mean, my opinion is it's completely pointless. But is there any purpose of doing that sort of thing? I don't know.
Well, you know, when Christians tried to redefine the word, I think we have to say, you know, give them a slap in the face and say, no, you can't have that word.
What about the whole like, are babies atheists type of question? Is that a useful question to be asking?
Well, I think it is. The reason I've had these discussions quite publicly about how people define atheism, and it's not because anything important hinges on how you define a word. I mean, as long as you know how a person is using a word, if they're using it in a non-standard way or a different way, or if there are competing definitions floating around out there, that doesn't matter. As long as you know what the other person means, you can communicate. But it's sometimes hard when you are understanding a word a certain way and they're understanding a word a certain way. Even when you know their way of using it, it's hard to actually communicate with them because you are going to naturally import the implications of your definition when you're talking to them, and then you end up bumping into each other. And what I think matters with the definition of atheism, the only thing that matters, is this idea of whether or not atheism is some kind of default position and who has burden of proof. That's what's at issue here. And I think that a lot of people in the online atheist movement are deeply confused about this, and we sort of, my view is that we're actually embarrassing the hell out of ourselves in the atheist community by going around saying that there's such a thing as a default position, as if that was a justified position, right? It doesn't matter what belief state you start with or don't start with. The question is whatever position you have a justifiable one when you're asked, what do you think of this? That's what matters. It's not what you start with. I mean, if you start off not believing in God, that is not, therefore, a rational position. I started off not believing the Holocaust. Does it make sense if I persist in not believing the Holocaust? No. That's not. It wouldn't be rational to not believe in the Holocaust on the basis that I started off not believing the Holocaust. So nothing hinges on the definition of atheism except things like the idea of a burden of proof and a default position and stuff like that. Where you start off, what psychological state you start off in, is completely irrelevant to rationality. And to the extent that people in the online atheist community are committed to rationality and reasonableness and critical thinking, we shouldn't be going around saying, if you think there's no God, you have no burden of proof. That's preposterous.
Wait, what? That's completely backwards. Of course, you know, if you don't believe in God, you've rejected the proof. The burden of proof isn't on you.
Well, let me explain why I think that's wrong. There's something that is said all the time in the atheist community which will get you laughed out of a critical thinking class, okay? And that is that the person making the positive claim has the burden of proof. Yes, that's true. The person making the positive claim has a burden of proof. The person making a negative claim has a burden of proof too. It's a different burden of proof. It's the opposite burden of proof. Okay, but when you say there is a Batmobile in my garage, you have a burden of proof. And if I say no, there is no Batmobile in my garage, I have a burden of proof. Okay?
Oh, but I think the one thing you're confusing is most atheists aren't saying that there is no God. Most of us are saying there's no evidence to support the belief in God. It's
okay,
totally
that I think is a mistake. Most atheists, in fact, say things like there is no God. When push comes to shove, they don't want to say that. They say, I merely lack a belief in God. But they will routinely go, I mean, the very people who say, I merely lack a belief in God, and try to describe their position as if it was an absence of an opinion.
But Ozzy,
Hang on, I just thought, okay, go ahead.
no, go ahead and then I'll talk.
Okay, thank you. The same people who will try to characterize their view as a lack of a belief, a lack of an opinion entirely, on the basis of insufficient
that's not
evidence.
a lack of an opinion. That's stating that's a rejection of your opinion of an opinion. You know.
Well, rejecting a claim is a claim.
But
If I reject the claim that the Holocaust happened, that would make me a Holocaust denier.
It's like you can draw the null hypothesis.
Well, but hang on. See, here's the thing. It's not the null hypothesis, and here's why. People who go around in the atheist community saying, I merely lack a belief, the difficulty is that those same people are going around saying, God is a myth, God is unreal, God is a delusion, God is imaginary, God is a cultural invention.
But Ozzy,
those are all claims that are claiming there is not a God, that theism is false.
But Ozzy, there is a logical problem when you say that I understand your point, but there is a problem when you say that there is a need for proof for the negative claim.
No, it's not proof. Wait, it's not proof. This is the mistake.
Because let me clarify first. Because sure. I am an atheist. I reject. There's an echo. Someone has a microphone on. I think it's you. Yes. All right. Anyway, I reject gods, and I do not believe in the supernatural.
No.
So when I talk to a religious person who says God exists, I say the burden of proof is with you, and I do that with a reason, because it should be easier for the person believing in God to provide me with the evidence than for a person who does not believe the gods exist, rejects the gods, to prove the gods do not exist. Because how do you logically prove gods exists if you reject the gods exists? How can I ever find evidence that gods do not exist if there is no God? I could spend thousands of years.
Sorry, George, are you still there?
George, I think you froze up.
Religious person would then simply say, you have not found the evidence yet. So that is the reason why most people would say the burden of proof is with the person that makes the positive claim.
Okay, that is a confused argument. Let me explain why. And I hear that argument all the time. It is absolutely true that if a person says, I believe in God, they have the burden of establishing that there is no God. That is the burden. Okay, they have to give reasons why it is rational to believe that there's a God. And if they walk up and they say there's a God, and I go, oh, really? Why? Well, I don't have a burden right now because I haven't said what my position is at all, and I want to know why. I could even share their belief, right? It doesn't matter what you believe. It doesn't matter what side of the issue you're on. If a person walks into a room and says, I believe X, they have to justify. As a condition of epistemic responsibility, they have to justify their position. Okay. Now, they don't have to prove that they're right. They have to give reasons why it's rational to believe what they do. I can't prove that I'm Canadian. Okay. I have excellent reasons for thinking that I'm a Canadian citizen, but I can't prove it. It's logically possible that all my evidence is messed up. Okay. So proof is irrelevant, right? And this is important because a lot of people, they hear the word burden of proof and they piss their pants. The burden of proof expression is borrowed from Latin. It's translation from onus probandum, and it just means burden of evidence. It doesn't mean burden of proof. It's translated as proof, yes, but it doesn't mean proof like a mathematical or a logical proof or a proof in set theory or geometry, where you have to prove something to a degree that means that it would be impossible to deny it. That's not what we mean by proof. It's like proof in court. You have to prove something in court. You don't have to prove it logically to the point where it's impossible to deny it, right? There just have to be excellent reasons for it. If you believe, wait, let me finish. So if a person comes along and says, "I believe there's a God," the burden of proof that is to say, they have a burden of justification. They've got to justify their belief, why they believe what they believe. Okay, that burden is entirely on them. Okay, but if I say to them, "I think there's no God," oh well, wait now, I too have made a claim about reality. I have made the claim that reality does not include any gods. Okay, and if that is your position, and you assert that position especially, then that is the burden of your justification in that discussion.
But the risk...
Wait, hang on. Now, what happens is this. People hear burden of proof, and a lot of atheists, they absolutely wet themselves when they go, oh, burden of proof, oh, I've got to prove that there's no God, and they freak out, and they realize, well, I can't prove that there's no God. It's impossible to prove there's no God, just like it's impossible to prove there's no unicorns or leprechauns. Right? I can't prove these things. Yes, but you can give reasons why it doesn't make sense to believe these things. Okay? The absence of evidence, for instance, is an excellent reason. Specifically, the absence of evidence where evidence should be found. The incoherence of the concepts sometimes. Certain God concepts are just incoherent. Certain concepts are coherent, but there's no evidence, and they're one of an infinity of possible God concepts on offer, which are mutually contradictory. They can't all be true, and I have no principled way of sifting them. So I can't accept, if I can accept one, I'd have to accept all. Well, I can't accept all because they're mutually incompatible. So I have to reject them until I have evidence to accept one of them. That is how you discharge your burden of evidence. It's that easy. You don't have to do anything more than that. And atheists do it all the time. They discharge the burden of evidence all the time, but they go around saying they don't have a burden of evidence, and they sound ridiculous because it sounds like they're afraid to assert what they actually believe and call themselves basically a lack theist. I lack theism, rather than actually saying what they believe, which is that there's no God.
I understand your position, but within a discussion, for me as an atheist, it would be easier to say that the burden of proof will lay with the believer.
Why?
Because I put more, I don't know if I will say this in English correctly, but because I think the claim that God exists is heavier than the claim that God
well, yes, they have a bigger burden. No, but that's to say they have a greater burden. This is the other thing, the other mistake that people make. They assume that if a person asserts P, a proposition P, and another person asserts not P, that P and not P have the same burden. That is, they are equally difficult to support. No, that's not true. Okay, if a person says that Bigfoot exists, that there really is a species of critter running around the Canadian woods called Bigfoot, okay, and I say no, there's no such thing as Bigfoot, they have a difficult burden. They've got to, for instance, provide material evidence that this creature exists. You know, they've got to find some scats, they've got to find hair samples that we can do DNA on, they've got to find a specimen, they've got to find bones, they've got to find something in the fossil record. They've got to produce something, okay, better than a blurry photograph and a fake cast of a footprint that never leads to a specimen or a den or any material evidence.
Well, I as an atheist, I won't piss my pants because I got lots of counter arguments, but I think the lady with who was doing her hair and I think was doing her nails wishes to speak, so I think she should be unmuted.
Yeah, she is unmuted.
So my trick here was I think proving a negative may be inherently more difficult. And carrying out an exhaustive search in the universe for something immaterial is somewhat difficult.
Proving a
negative,
yes. Proving a negative, but there's that word again. People hear the word proof, and this is what I mean when people piss their pants when they hear the word proof. They think they've got to establish that God is an impossibility. You don't have to establish that God is an impossibility. You just have to establish that there's no good reason to think that a God does exist. And you do that by pointing to the lack of evidence where you would expect to find it.
But I have never met a person who did what you say that atheists do, that they think they have to prove that God doesn't exist. I've never met anyone who said that, actually.
That's right. That's right. But this is what every atheist says, I shouldn't have to prove. And what the idea is this. They think that burden of proof means proving the impossibility. They know that they don't have to prove the impossibility, that that's irrational, and so they conclude, therefore, they have no burden of evidence.
But there is,
I can prove my reasoning for being an atheist or for not believing in God sufficiently by pointing to lack of evidence, like Ozzy's saying. I mean, you know, all the evidence that we can see of gods that people have believed in, you know, for various reasons, etc., in the past have been, you know, they've proven inconsistencies, these sorts of things. I mean, there's just a lack of evidence that supernatural things happen. We can't. There's no one's been able to, you know, I think we can't show that it's happening or anything like that. And so, yeah, that's sufficient justification for me not believing in God. My burden is sufficiently justified, but I still have it's satisfied, but I still have a burden there. I mean, it's like people who are atheists who haven't even, it's like atheists who haven't even, I mean, they haven't really considered the position. I mean, I suppose people who haven't really learned about it, I suppose they haven't really constructed a worldview, but I don't know, maybe I'm overextending here, but
No.
I interrupted Nadia. I'm sorry, Nadia. I interrupted you to make a point, but then the conversation drifted. Could you go back? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I apologize.
It's my fault.
Given the feasibility or infeasibility of such a search process, we're left with logical arguments that are well, only get so far. And I mean, for instance, argument from contrariety or whatever it is you mentioned earlier with all the inconsistent notions of deity floating around. Well, I mean, the force to conclusion is that, you know, it's unlikely that any particular one is right, but yeah, and that's not very forceful.
Well, I mean, believers. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were done. No. I thought you were done. Please continue.
In the case of the counterclaim or counterargument, right? They say, well, Jesus witnesses, and we have the body or had the body. At least for a while. So that's
a good example of something that just proves sort of like, well, I mean, points towards, a reason, I mean, inconsistencies in that particular theology, I mean, of Jesus and, modern Christianity and stuff like that.
I have an interesting proposal. So suppose we go with Ozzy on this, and I think most people here are atheists. So what if you were to give your reasons to a theist why you are an atheist, and why do you think God does not exist? What would you tell the theist?
Well, I would tell them a number of things. I would point. Okay, well, first of all, you have to sort out two things. Are you arguing against a specific theism, a specific God? Well, you don't have to argue for atheism if you're arguing against a specific God. You just have to argue against. If I think Yahweh doesn't exist, I think arguing against Yahweh is fairly easy. I think I can look to archaeology, science, biology, history, and I can debunk Yahweh. Yahweh doesn't make any sense. Yahweh is just.
I think it's pronounced Jehovah.
Well, no, that's sort of a modern, later way of a guess at how to pronounce it. So I mean, if we're talking about Yahweh or Christianity, I mean, I think that those gods are off the table. I mean, there are too many facts that contradict this. We'd have to sort of reject too much of our science, too much of our history. for these claims to be true. So if you're arguing against a particular theism, a particular God, you don't have to even argue that no gods exist. You just have to argue that that God doesn't exist. And so you might use rather particular or specific arguments. But if I'm arguing with someone who says, well, wait a minute, how do you argue against all forms of theism, every God? Okay, well, I argue against every God on the basis, that is, I have to explain, I have to justify, I don't have to prove that a God is an impossibility. I just have to justify why it's rational to think that there are no gods, and why specifically it's more rational to believe that there's no gods than that there are any gods. And the way you do that is you point first to the lack of evidence. Okay. Now that might mean that you have to get into some arguments with them, and then the ball's in their court to provide the evidence, which you then have to address. And you have to point specifically to the lack of evidence where you would expect to find it. That's Bigfoot, a good example. You don't have to. Why do we not believe in Bigfoot? It's not because we have searched every square centimeter of the Canadian woods and established that there's no Bigfoot. You know, we scoured every square centimeter of the Canadian woods simultaneously, and we didn't find Bigfoot. No, that's not how we've come to the rational conclusion that Bigfoot doesn't exist. We have come to the rational conclusion that Bigfoot doesn't exist because none of the relevant evidence that we should expect to find is there. No specimens, no footprints that lead to a specimen, no bones, no hair that's been DNA sampled, no scats, no trail cams getting glorious footage, no hunter shot one, no train hit one, none ever drowned and washed up on the shore. I mean, nothing you would expect to find if such critters were running around has ever been found. Okay, so what we have here is a lack of evidence where we would expect to find it, and a lack of evidence where you would expect to find it. That is evidence of absence. What else could possibly be evidence of absence? So we have evidence of the absence of Bigfoot. Okay, it's in the absence of evidence where we would expect to find evidence, and that evidence is not found. The other thing to keep in mind: what about more abstract conceptions of God, of an immaterial, rarefied God that doesn't, like a God of deism that doesn't interfere in the empirical world? Okay, well, those people who are saying that, for the most part, are forsaking the concept of there being empirical evidence. So they're practically handing you the card that you're not going to find evidence, because they're saying you shouldn't even expect to find evidence. Okay, good. So we don't have evidence and we shouldn't expect to find it. Okay, so now it comes down to what reasons are there to think, absent any evidence, that your God exists? Well, now it's balls back in their court. Now they have to supply a burden of proof because you've answered your burden of justification. They have to provide their burden of justification. And whatever they come up with, you can say, well, listen, couldn't there be another God other than your God with slightly different attributes or even completely different attributes? Consider all the possible gods that have ever been put on offer, of a deistic variety, of a pantheistic variety, of a panentheist variety. There are all kinds of different gods out there that are not sort of mucking about in the creation and changing events and performing miracles and leaving evidence. There are all of these more abstract gods. But what is the evidence for believing in one over the other? It's going to come down to evidence. They either have it or they don't. And if they don't have it, and you have just these competing abstractions, then you can point out, well, listen, I don't have any reason for accepting any of these, but they're mutually exclusive. So I can't accept them all, and I have no reason to prefer one over the other. If I reject one, I can reject them all, but I can't accept them all. This is an all or none thing. I have no particular reason to favor one, and it's impossible to accept them all, so I'm left with having to reject them all until the other person can give me a reason to accept one particular rarefied God over the rest. So they never get out of their burden of justification, but I think I'm able to discharge my burden of justification. And it's always going to end up with me pointing out to them, you need to come up with the evidence. But it's not that I don't have a burden of justification, it's that mine is almost trivially easy to discharge. And that's why it's a mistake to say I don't have a burden. I do have a burden, I am discharging it. I've just given you an example of how I would do it. And what I've described is, in fact, how many atheists proceed. They actually do this. But they've been told, you don't have a burden. The problem with that is, that's logically speaking, it's ridiculous. When you assert a proposition about reality, You're making a claim about reality. Your claims about reality, you either have a reason for thinking they're true, or you don't. And if you do, they need to be rational reasons. But if you think you don't have a reason, and you don't have a reason because you don't think you need to have one, I got news for you. You don't have a rational position.
Okay, I think
Yeah.
Nadia wants to
And
go.
that is a problem.
You don't have to swear. Don't have to swear an oath, Nadia. You go.
Okay.
I'm just fucking
Yeah.
around.
In the meantime, there's some trickiness because they do produce evidence of the sort, albeit not valid. I mean, similar to the fake cats and fur samples from Bigfoot aficionados, you have the creationist wackiness and with their claims about the geological column and Noah's flood and so on. Amongst other crazy things like I think they claimed it on Jesus' tomb. And of course, coming back with like, whatever debunkings of those is, I guess part of maybe our burden or whatever to counter that. And even the abstract things have have some bits of trouble there for say logical arguments like Gödel's modal ontological argument or something like that. It can be pretty difficult to definitively get a good justification. There are also things that aren't quite as like widely publicized and so are tougher to respond to or take down on the fly. Like Shanna's whole strange idealism thing, and the deity being the consciousness that holds the universe together. So, I mean, even at that point, there's trouble. I think saying there's no evidence isn't quite right. They're producing something, and it's not valid. And part of our work here is to demonstrate that what they're producing as evidence isn't valid. Like the people that test the Bigfoot fur and find out that it came from a cat or a bear or something.
Yeah, you're right. It's wrong to suggest that people don't have evidence, right? In some cases, they don't have evidence. They have what they think is evidence, but is junk. Okay, they're just confused. Their facts are not in order and stuff like that. I mean, they have reasons, they have arguments, but they don't necessarily constitute evidence. That is, they're not probative. The reasons and arguments and the evidence, the facts that they're alluding to, they're invoking, don't in fact imply the conclusion. But there are people who put forward arguments, which if the arguments are valid and sound, then they are evidence. And I think one can actually put forward arguments and evidence for a God, rationally speaking, but they're not, I would say, not sufficient to warrant actually any confidence in the proposition, because the arguments against, I think, are in fact superior. And that's what you want to do. But I think a lot of atheists in our community are just sort of, they're weary. That we've all had the experience of sort of effectively demolishing somebody's arguments because they're terrible arguments that they put forward, and then they continue to to insist. And so people just get weary. They get fatigue. It's atheist fatigue. They're just tired of having to argue for their position that there's no God, and they would just rather sit back and let the other person put forward their reasons and then attack it. Well, that's good. You should do that. But you should also, when you are asked, do you think there's a God, answer truthfully and say, I think there's no God. And not describe yourself as lacking a belief. Yes, you're lacking a belief, but...
Well,
but
I don't know about you.
An agnostic is lacking a belief too, but that person is also lacking a belief that there's not a God. lacking a belief is not, in fact, being honest about what your position is. If your position is that there is no God, and you're asked what your position is, it behooves you as an honest interlocutor to put your cards on the table and say, well, here is my position. Now, the fact that you put your position on the table doesn't mean that they have to stop arguing for their case, right? And that you have to start arguing for yours. What happens is you're now subject to being interrogated on your view and justifying your position. But you shouldn't be afraid to justify your position if you think your position is rational. But there's no way your position is rational if you think you don't even have a burden.
Well, that's the thing. When you argue against apologetics, apologists, they're dishonest. They'll use any trick and try to, if they can't convince you, they'll try to piss you off actively. I mean, I would say that I don't, would say that I don't have enough evidence, but at the end of the day, they're just gonna go over and over and over and over, and they're just gonna try and piss you off and make you look bad. So, not only is that position easier, it's the safer and less and least likely to give you the most headaches.
How is it safer to misrepresent your position as lacking a belief when you in fact do have a belief that there's no God? How is that safer? How is playing hide the ball with what you believe safer? How is it safer to characterize your position as needing no rational basis while claiming that your position is the rational position? That we discredit ourselves by doing this. I mean, there are these memes that go around that only the person making a positive assertion has a burden of justification. Every assertion about reality you make, positive or negative, has a burden of justification.
Strategy here.
No, but what I'm suggesting is that it's bad strategy and it's dishonest strategy. I think it is. Now, when I say it's dishonest strategy, I don't mean that the people who are doing this are dishonest. I think that they've actually come to believe certain memes and think that this is in fact true, that only a positive assertion has a burden of justification, and that their own position isn't a positive assertion. Like I hear people say, "I merely lack a belief." Well, okay, well, then you better stop saying things like God isn't real, God's a myth, God is a delusion, God's an invention, God is a fiction. You got to shut up about this, because you've got to make up your mind what your position is.
People.
Yeah, well, I think what people are doing is they're trying to flee. This is exactly the same move when you're arguing with a Christian who believes that the triune God of Christianity is the one and only God, and when you ask them why do you believe this, they hit you with the cosmological argument that doesn't imply that their God exists, but the Creator exists. Okay, and then but you said, well, wait a minute, you haven't given me reasons for believing that your God exists. I want to know why your God exists. I want to understand. I want you to justify your position. And they hide the ball, and they just try to hide behind some vague theism. Okay, that's not intellectually honest when they're doing it. Now it's okay if all they're trying to do is disprove atheism. All they've got to do to disprove atheism is prove theism. So if they've got a good argument for theism that rules out atheism, then that's fine. But if they're supposed to be arguing for their Christianity, or their Judaism, or their Islam, or their Hinduism, they better have reasons for why they believe that. And similarly, if you're an atheist and you're asked why you're an atheist, you better have reasons why you think there's no God, and not be playing hide the ball and saying that I have no more burden of justification than a houseplant does. Okay, I mean, I think we don't look like the rational ones when we do this, is my concern.
Speaking of the Kalam, I think Matt Bell is running a off-air, on-air hangout at this very moment, even.
Wait, Matt Bell is having a hangout where he's discussing the Kalam cosmological argument?
Right now.
That's impossible.
Surely not.
Yeah, there's one ongoing at this very moment, even.
Yeah, it's his favorite argument.
I haven't heard his take on that particular argument. It'd be fascinating to get a grasp of it. I've heard him speak of many other topics, such as cosmological argument, and William Lane Craig's cosmological argument.
Well, no, but that is the
I'm being
that is
facetious
the,
here, but
oh, okay, yeah, no. Well, he does have his own take on it, actually.
I know he does.
Oh, okay.
I've heard
Well,
it though. I've heard it.
even
Oh, okay.
so, even so, he's still a William Lane Craig fanboy. So, yeah, people have actually challenged him on, I guess, try to actually show that first cause inferred as a deity. And, you've gotten that far, but
invite him
Christian
on
one.
here.
What's that?
We should invite him on here.
Oh, give it a shot.
Sure, he's been on Magic Sandwich. But Matt Bell is actually very, well, if he's doing his own hangout, they'll go inviting him to this one. I mean, he's hosting his own hangout. But Matthew Bell is actually very good at championing that argument. I mean, I don't think it's a very good argument, but I mean, he and I we've had long discussions about it. So, but I mean,
I've
he's
watched
actually,
just about every one you've had with him, and I agree with your. You clarify a lot of people for a lot of people who try to argue against him, but they sort of misrepresent what he's saying. Like his positions, he sticks to it, I guess, more or less.
yeah, he doesn't play hide the ball with what he believes. Now, Matthew Bell actually seldom argues specifically for Christianity. He does, but not very often. But that's because his project really is to show that theism is rational.
He attacked G-Man the other week. He was just tearing shreds through him, basically, telling him he's not a real Christian, and it was quite interesting at one point. It was almost like he was like, and I'm telling you that you can't tell me that just because it's interesting.
Yeah, he's Matthew Bell actually deserves some credit. He is someone who goes after a lot of these fundamentalists. I mean, he is himself a very conservative Christian, but he is absolutely not a fundamentalist. He's not a young earth creationist. He's not a biblical literalist. He's not a biblical inerrantist. He believes in the inspiration of Scripture, but he's not a biblical inerrantist. He grants that there are errors in the Bible. He doesn't reject any particular chapter of science, because it contradicts the Bible. His position is what he calls rational theism. He wants to be a rational theist, and he thinks that you can be a rational theist and you can be a rational Christian. And he goes after what he thinks are some of the more egregious Christian apologists on YouTube. He goes after Arcane Logos, and he takes them up at hangouts and reads them the Riot Act, and
I like how he goes. The ones that have prices on, particularly the ones that have prices on what you have to do or achieve to get the quota to be, seen good in God's eyes, sort of thing. He's quite anti that, those sorts of things, which I commend.
I just wanted to bring up a few of the comments that were being left on the YouTube video. So, over an atheistic dude brings up the point that more than half of agnostics, according to research, actually do believe in a god. So he says slightly more than half of agnostics believe in a god or higher power, according to research a few years ago, and that was addressed towards Ozzy. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's another reason why we shouldn't go around calling agnostics atheists. Most people who call themselves agnostics do so because they really are having a hard time deciding if there's a god or not.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on that.
I mean, I remember when I became. I was an agnostic for a while on the way out of my faith. I went through. I was kind of typical. I was sort of fundamentalist. Sort of lost some of my fundamentalist beliefs, and then eventually lost my faith, but became an agnostic, and then became a kind of quasi-deist, and then finally an atheist. It happened fairly rapidly in my case because I was quite young, but a lot of agnostics are somewhat believers in God, and some of them are atheists. And the problem is that people who use the word agnostic, some of them, not all of them, and not the majority, but some significant number of them, are just going with agnosticism because atheism has bad connotations, and they don't want to be labeled an atheist. And they're worried that if they say they're an atheist, that they're going to have to explain why they think there is no God, and they don't feel comfortable.
It's like Tyson and Sagan.
Well, just wait till
Yeah,
the
Neil deGrasse
next
Tyson. Yeah,
census
yeah,
comes out.
yeah. So I mean, my feeling is, look, um, uh, first of all, the word agnostic um, refers to, the word was coined by Thomas Henry Huxley to describe people who are of the opinion not only that they don't know and can't decide that there's no God, but that the question is undecidable. Okay, so there are really two kinds of agnostics, broadly speaking. There are people who are really kind of on the fence and think that they don't know. Maybe the question is decidable, but they don't think that they have the evidence for it, and so they don't want to commit to asserting God exists or God doesn't exist because they're not comfortable. They really have no confidence. That can happen. You can be sort of, I don't know, they lack a belief that there's a God, and they lack a belief that there's no God. Now, there are some people that are hiding in there who really are theists and really are atheists, who are hiding in the label of agnosticism. But then you have other agnostics who think, no, I'm a strong agnostic. I'm the kind of agnostic who thinks the question is unknowable. Not I don't know it, it's unknowable. The question cannot be answered. All of you theists and atheists out there are just bullshitting. You're not in a position to know. You're not in a position to be even justified rationally, to be confident one way or the other. You should just stop pretending that the question is decidable. And then you have people like igtheists. Igtheists, or used to be called theological non-cognitivists, are people who think that the term God, all of the God concepts, are either so full of equivocations or incoherent that that the question isn't even meaningful, so that you can't even say that you're an atheist because the concept of God is so ill-defined. You can't even get as far as being an atheist. You can't lack a belief in the proposition there's a God, because you can't lack a belief in the proposition that there's no God or that there is a God. It's just incoherent. The whole discourse is incoherent.
The strongest.
And those people aren't even agnostics. They think even agnostics are talking nonsense because they say there isn't an object of knowledge here at all. So you can't even be an agnostic about it.
The strongest evidence I think an atheist can ever put forth for the disproof that a specific God exists, are the thousands of other gods that seem to exist.
Well, I think that's a good argument, but it's not a very strong argument. I mean, it's a piece
but
of the puzzle.
But why would that not be a strong argument? Why does Thor not exist?
Well,
why does the God of the Bible exists, and why does the God of Islam do exist? It all comes down to a simple point of fact: is the ignorance of the knowledge of history.
Well,
because we know how the current major three faiths, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, came to be. We know that from history. So why?
This is compelling as long as the person's interpretation isn't the true one, and that's what they believe, and that's sort of the problem.
I don't even think it's a very. I don't even think it's a very strong argument, irrespective of what the. I mean, I'm an atheist, and I don't think it's a very strong argument. It has nothing to do with what a theist thinks about it. I mean, the reason I don't think it's a very strong argument is it simply doesn't follow. It's a non sequitur to say this God is a fiction, this God is a fiction, this God is a fiction. All these gods are inventions. Therefore, any God that is put forward is.
Why I do not understand that, because how can an argument not be so strong as when you tell a believer you were born in this country, which is Protestant or Muslim or Christian or Jewish, and you were brought up to believe that God exists? How can that argument not be so strong by saying there are thousands of other gods, but you were brought up in that culture with that belief, so that is your God? So how can that God you believe be the God that is the only God livable and in existence? I do not understand how you can have
I think more than
explain it.
But brought up the point there that I'll just be quick that it might I sort of agree with Ozzy that it isn't a strong argument, but I do think it's a very convincing argument. So it definitely has utility. I mean, as far as I can tell, it's one of the most convincing arguments there is. But I don't think that's mutually exclusive to what Ozzy's saying.
Yeah, you've got to separate two things. What the argument shows is it explains why people come to believe what they believe. It doesn't show that those gods don't exist. It shows. You asked me why it wasn't a good argument. I'm trying to explain to you why I think it's not a good argument. Explaining how a person. I'll give you an example. Okay, I mean, a person could say to me, Ozzy, the reason you believe in evolution and an old universe and an old Earth is because you grew up in a society where that is the dominant belief. Most people have not studied these things in my culture, and yet most people here in Canada believe these things, even though they've really not studied any of these things. It's just been pickled into them as part of their culture. Now, does that mean that cosmology is junk and evolutionary theory is junk and geology is junk? No, of course not. How you come to have a belief, okay, is sort of an accident of your history. It has no probative value with respect to the veracity or falsity of your belief. What these arguments that you're putting forward do show, though, what is good about them is they explain the patterns of belief and how a person could have a belief even if there was no God. And that's what's so persuasive about them, is they show, look, why would people believe these particular things if there was no God? If these gods didn't exist, if these religions were false, why would they believe them anyway? Well, notice the pattern. You'll see that this is just how it works. So why would you think that your case is any different? So it goes to undermine a person's confidence that the only reason they could believe is if that God existed, and that there would be no way to explain, because Christians will say it all the time, how do you explain the fact that there's a billion Christians in the world? They think that's evidence. Well, you can demolish that argument using the arguments that you did. But what you cannot do is show that a God doesn't exist on that basis, for the same reason that you couldn't show that a coelacanth doesn't exist just because you pointed out that a dragon is a myth, a leprechaun is a myth, a unicorn is a myth, a mermaid is a myth. Yep, go ahead.
I agree you cannot use it as evidence that God does not exist, but it is evidence, partly, that they have no reason to prove that their God is real. That's the point.
No, it doesn't prove that they don't have evidence. Whether or not they have evidence is up to whatever they happen to give. They might have evidence. They might have good arguments, right?
No, but that's the whole point. They think they have evidence because they were brought up in that culture, but in the next country they have another culture with another god. They have the same argument. So
that is a non sequitur. But that's a non sequitur. It doesn't matter. I mean,
I do not.
I could disprove. I'm sorry. Forgive me. I forgot. I mean, your English is quite good. You have an accent, but your English is good. So I forget that you're not a native speaker of English. Sorry. Non sequitur is just Latin, and it just means that it does not follow. That it's not the next thing in sequence. The conclusion doesn't follow from the premises. So the conclusion that they don't have good reasons does not follow from the fact that they happen to have been born in a country where everyone believes as they do. I mean, imagine if a person were to say to you, listen, the reason you can't possibly have good reasons for believing in evolution and believing in an ancient universe because you were born and raised in a secular culture that values science and simply accepts these things, right? Imagine if a person were to suggest that you don't have good reasons on that basis, right? That would not be a good argument, right? And it's not a good argument when we level it at them. But where I think it is a very good argument is in explaining that you don't have to invoke the existence of a God to explain widespread belief in a God. Widespread belief in gods is what you would expect, whether a God exists or not, right? It's not a surprise that people believe in a God, right? And so then the question for them is, why do you believe in your God? And then they, of course, they have to supply their reasons. But you can't claim that they can't and don't have reasons simply because of where they were born.
No, but
That-
they have to explain why all the other people are wrong. That's the point.
Well, yeah, but they do. They'll explain it the same way you will, probably.
Well, an extra base to the argument from contrariety is demonstrating, or at least recounting the history that shows essentially that the origins of Judaism from Canaanite polytheism, at which point it's put on footing much closer to, say, the Greek and Norse pantheons. Also, I would, rewinding a bit further, say that there's some trouble because they also construct their sort of parallel authorities. Like they have their own alternate history and I guess, historians of a sort that will, I guess, endorse it. And you also have parallel science, like the creationist affairs have, their fake scientists or in institutes and so on that they'll defer to as authorities as well. So at some point you end up with like cases where you're calling on experts and somehow making an appeal to authority, and you can't ever get them to necessarily agree on which authorities are valid.
Okay, so just briefly, there's John Klein wants this question's directed as at Ozzy, but I suppose anyone can answer it. If he cringes when a theist says he already knows God exists, but is simply repressing it, so the whole you know God exists when you're an atheist type thing. If anyone wants to start addressing that, the question's directed towards Ozzy.
Sorry, it took me a moment to unmute myself. Yeah, well, the first thing to do when a person says to you, you're not an atheist, in your heart of hearts, you know that God exists. The first thing to do is not freak out and not get upset and indignant. Because you have to understand that that is their theology. It's unfortunate that that's their theology, but they are at least expressing their dogma to you. Okay, they're not playing hide the ball. They're not patronizing you and pretending that you're an atheist when they don't think you are. They're in fact telling you you're not an atheist. Okay, but the next thing I would say is, okay, well, so the first thing I would say is don't take umbrage. Don't take offense at that. The next thing I would say is you can point out that that is in fact irrelevant. Okay, it borders on ad hominem because they're suggesting that you're lying to them. But then you just have to ask them, well, look, I think I'm an atheist. You think I'm not. Okay, and maybe you think that I don't think I'm an atheist. The question, though, is this. Even if I'm not an atheist, even if, like you, I am a theist, I want to hear your reasons for your theism. I want to hear rational reasons for your theism, and I'm going to give you rational reasons for my atheism, okay? Or my agnosticism, or my igtheism, or whatever your position is, okay? That's what you need to do. You need to sort of forget the fact that they're challenging you with being a liar. They're calling you a liar to your face, okay? They're saying that you're not arguing in good faith. You can just say, well, look, that's simply irrelevant. Because you could be talking to a fellow theist who wants to know what your reasons are. You could be talking to a theist of another religion. You could be talking to a theist of another religion who wants to know what's wrong with atheism. I could be a theist, right? I could be a theist and say, listen, I think atheism is false, you think atheism is false, but I'd like to know, rationally speaking, what are the arguments against atheism? What are the arguments for your specific theism? And let me try out some arguments for atheism on you, okay? And if they say, well, I don't want to talk to a person who's not, okay, well, fine, then you don't want to talk to me. You go on your way. You either want to talk to me or you don't want to talk to me, Okay, but I'm of the opinion that I am an atheist. You can disagree with that. Okay, that's fine. But what you don't get to do is dismiss my arguments and objections. You can either address my arguments and objections irrespective of what I believe. Okay, um, it is simply what is happening here are two positions are being argued: theism versus atheism, or atheism versus Christianity, or Calvinism, or whatever the person is that you're arguing. Okay, you're arguing for your atheism or agnosticism against whatever their position is, and it doesn't matter what you believe. Okay, it you really, this is a clash of ideas, and the ideas have to be evaluated on the basis of arguments, reasons, and evidence. And it doesn't matter about the sincerity. The sincerity is just a matter of civil discourse. You should be sincere. You should be honest. And as a result, if you are in fact an atheist, you should be sincere and say, well, listen, I am, as a matter of fact, an atheist, but if you would like to think that I'm not, that's fine, but I'm here to argue for atheism, and if you think there's no such thing as an atheist, that's fine. I'd still like to hear why atheism is false, because even if there was not an atheist in the world, it would still be interesting to know why atheism is false, wouldn't it? So I'd like to hear it, and I'd like to hear why your theism is true. And so it doesn't matter that I'm a theist or an atheist or an agnostic or whatever. It doesn't matter what you think of my position. I am presenting this position against your position. You don't have to have that conversation, but if you're going to have that conversation, you don't have to worry about my sincerity here. It's simply irrelevant. I could stand here right now and argue for Calvinism if I wanted to. Okay, I might not be able to do a very good job because I'm not a Calvinist. Okay, but it would be foolish if someone said, "Oh, Ozzy, but you're not a Calvinist. I don't want to have this argument." Yeah, but I want to test out the arguments. So this is about arguments. It's not about personalities.
Ozzy, may I ask? I asked it in the text. Even Richard Dawkins leaves a percentage open to the existence for God, and of course, because he is a scientific person, he has to do that. But I cannot find a common ground in this as an atheist, and I will say gods do not exist, and I will defend this. That gods do not exist, and I understand there are lots of counter arguments with it, but would you consider my position as an atheist wrong by defending my point, saying gods do not exist, and me defending this harshly to the best I can, most respectfully and kindly, as I tend to be, as my responses on a lot of YouTube posts and comments I have responded on over the years. How would you verse a person like me? Because I understand you do not 100% agree with me on this. That I will say, I will defend my position. Gods do not exist. Point. End.
Well, we don't disagree on your conclusion. I actually I share your view. I believe that there's no there are no gods. I think that is the more rational position. I can't prove that. I mean, in the sense that I certainly cannot prove that all gods are impossible. But I don't have to. That's not the. I mean, I don't have to prove that unicorns don't exist. I just have to have good reasons, better reasons for thinking that unicorns don't exist than that they do exist. So it is my view that there are no gods. And that all religions are false, and that's what I argue. Where we've been disagreeing is really on specific arguments, like burden of proof. What is burden of proof? What claims have to be? What claims incur what burdens? Which arguments are strong or weak relative to your purposes? But I think we actually agree on this. I think we agree on the conclusion.
Well, will this vary by the particular conception of deity? I mean, like, in principle, someone could, trot out some definition or conception or whatever that posits the Taco Bell Chihuahua from the 90s is a deity, and
sure.
Of course, well, it's dead, but anyway. In the meantime, they can also have things that are, I don't know, innately unfalsifiable. At which point you, well, wait, you have to do something Dawkins-like there. Say, well, the odds are against it because of whatever, but ultimately you can't definitively falsify it, and so on and so forth. And isn't that the case? It varies by the particular conception of deity.
Well, yeah. When I say I'm an atheist, I'm talking about every God I've ever heard of, right? I obviously cannot be an atheist with respect to conceptions of God I have never heard of, right? It's like asking me, do you believe that animals exist? Yeah, I believe animals exist. That doesn't mean I believe every animal exists. Only the animals that I've heard of. There are some animals that you'll propose to me, I'll go, I don't think that exists. So, I mean, if a person asks you, what would you say in this case? Well, then you have to consider that case. So if someone says, listen, I think God is, and they define it as like the Taco Bell Chihuahua, then I'll say, okay, I don't know why you're calling that God, but I think that exists. I think you're an idiot for calling that God. But if you want to call that God, for the purposes of our argument, we'll say the Taco Bell Chihuahua is God, and in that case, under that definition of God, God exists. That, I think, however, is a specious definition of God. There are people who do this with nature. They'll say that God is just the natural world. Oh, well, I happen to believe in the natural world. Oh, how about that? On your definition of theism, I'm a theist. Okay, great. We're both theists. How about that? We don't have a disagreement. That's great. So what? Nothing follows from that. That's trivial. And then when people get into sort of more abstract gods where they are intrinsically unfalsifiable, I would say, well, look, if they're intrinsically unfalsifiable, then they are intrinsically unsupportable. That is, there is no reason to think that they are true. If there's no evidence, no probative evidence in support of them over some other equally unfalsifiable entity, then again, as I said before, if I have no reason for accepting one and rejecting the other, I either have to reject them all or accept them all. But unfortunately, I can't accept them all because, as you said, contrariety. They contradict one another. They can't all be true. Therefore, I have to reject them all until I'm given some specific reason. So I don't think it's that I don't think it's that difficult a problem when people have these vague conceptions of God. You just sort of have to let the person spin out what it is they're referring to and what they mean, and you have to hear them out, and then you have to say, okay, well, what reasons do you have for thinking that that thing exists? And then you evaluate the arguments and the evidence. I mean, who knows? They could convince you that, how about maybe that thing does exist? You don't have to be closed-minded. I mean, I don't lobby or agitate for atheism. I see myself as a proponent of rationality and critical thinking and skepticism because I think those are good epistemological virtues to cultivate in oneself, and I think that will sort of naturally tend to lead people to become at least agnostics, if not atheists. And I think that sort of atheism takes care of itself if you can propagate and cultivate a proper respect for rationality and skepticism. That's more important to me than getting people to believe there's no God. Actually, I think that atheism properly should be a byproduct of these epistemological virtues, and if they do, that's great. So I leave it there.
I did actually have a question for you. I'm just trying to remember what it was about something earlier we were discussing. Oh yeah, the part about just to justify being an atheist. Sorry, it's a long time ago, but I had this question specifically for Ozzy, and also it relates back to the conversation that we were having about Basel assumptions, that sort of thing. I don't want to start that whole thing over again, but my question is, can we bring in Occam's razor here on basically the idea is that we always look for the least contrived, most elegant sort of worldview in all aspects, and that one without some sort of contrived deity is probably the better one.
Yeah, you can invoke Occam's razor whenever a person appeals to God as an explanatory entity. Right? If they have a reason why God exists, and it has nothing to do with explaining some particular phenomenon, but they're trying, if they say, for instance, how do you explain how life arose, or how do you explain why there is something rather than nothing? Okay, well then they're using God in that case as an explanatory principle. They are positing a God for its explanatory power. A piece of the evidence or piece of the argument for God's existence, as they see it, is that it would explain something that needs explaining. Okay. So now that's only a good argument if it in fact does explain something. If they just say God can just poof something into existence, well, I'm sorry, that's not an explanation. That is a pseudo explanation. And so if you don't in fact have an explanation, you're simply declaring that something is the explanation, or you're declaring that something has such and such unspecified properties or specified properties, such that if it existed, that would explain the universe or life or whatever. Well, I'm sorry, but those are stipulations. You don't have reasons for thinking that those exist, but more importantly, when you are simply stipulating that God has some power X and you don't know what that power is specifically, I've got news for you, you're not explaining anything. That would be like me saying, I can explain why it snowed yesterday. Why? Well, there's this thing called a widget, and a widget has the power of Quatlu, and the power of Quatlu, when exercised by a widget, can produce snowstorms. That's not an explanation. That's just a bunch of words. That's a bunch of stipulations. And unfortunately, a lot of theistic arguments are like this. Now, they're not all like this. Some of them you, in fact, have to challenge and confront. But
can Occam's razor backfire sometimes?
Well, I don't think in those cases it's going to backfire because those are in fact not explaining anything. So it can't be the case.
But are there some cases where it will?
Like what? I can't think of one offhand.
Deism, or something.
Deism? Well, I think that deism is explanatorily vacuous.
Right. Occam's razor.
I think Occam's razor there. You can shave off the god of deism because the god of deism I think does no explanatory work. It in fact posits no mechanisms. Right? There are no causes, no mechanisms. It just posits that there's a mind. How a disembodied mind makes anything happen, much less brings things into existence, that's not an explanation. That is a stipulation. And all evidence that we do have suggests that minds, in order to be causally efficacious, have to be instantiated in bodies. They have to be physical. They have to be physically instantiated. Even if and this is not to beg the question about whether the mind is physical or not, but minds that are causally efficacious, like ours and animal minds, they are all instantiated in a physical thing before they can actually bring about physical things or create physical things. So if anyone wants to suggest that a disembodied mind can create something like the universe, they're going to have to remember that they are playing fast and loose with the inductive evidence. If you look at the inductive evidence suggests that first of all minds are embodied, and that only an embodied mind can have a physical causal effect on anything. A creative, to be a creative force. And so positing a disembodied, extra or non-physical mind is in fact not an explanation of any kind. It's a pseudo-explanation. And so Occam's razor just gets rid of that because it's in fact not doing any explaining. It's not that it's explaining. I can explain the same thing just as well using something else. This thing isn't even explaining anything.
Well, the reason why I ask you if Occam's razor could backfire is because I have experienced this before when I tried to invoke that. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but this person was kind of crazy. He said he immediately applied the same argument to quantum mechanics. He said to me, it's way too complicated, so therefore I invoke Occam's razor there.
Oh, okay. Well, that's not that person is misunderstanding Occam's
I
razor.
know. It's just I've experienced this before.
Well, actually, I have too. This is a misunderstanding that a lot of people have. A lot of people think that Occam's razor says that the simpler explanation is the preferred or better explanation, and that's not what Occam's razor says. What
No, it's
Occam's
the best explanation you should take.
it's not even that. It's Occam's razor says that when comparing two explanations, the explanation that posits fewer things, when both of them explain both the phenomena equally well, you choose the one that has the fewest posits. That is, you do not multiply explanatory entities beyond that which is strictly necessary to explain. You don't want any unnecessary parts in your explanation. You don't want any fifth wheels in your explanation. So if you've got to pause, if you want to explain why some physical reaction is happening in chemistry, and one person has an explanation that explains it perfectly and describes the phenomena perfectly and predicts everything exactly, and someone else has an equivalent explanation, but they're doing it and their posit involves positing more particles or different kinds of particles than the other one, right? One has more posits, more hypothetical entities than the other one has hypothetical entities. You choose the one that has the fewer posits, the fewer hypothetical entities, the fewer explanatory entities, because they're both doing the same explanatory work, but one requires that you assume more than the other. Why would you assume more than you need? It is simply
Unnecessary.
it is simply recognizing that there are unnecessary parts in the explanation, and therefore those unnecessary parts are not doing any explanatory work. So it's not.
Jodie Foster in my favorite movie, Contact.
Yeah, that's exactly the movie I was thinking about when I made this question.
Okay, I don't remember that movie very well. So I've seen it, but I don't remember it very well.
Well, it's basically at one point in the movie, Jodie Foster's character says to some guy she's in love with, and he's obviously a Christian, and then she says she uses Occam's razor, and that's why she doesn't believe in God. But later in the movie, because they use some sort of machine to speak with aliens, but the video camera shows that she hasn't been teleported. She has always been on Earth, and there are no proofs to help her case. And then that Christian guy uses the same argument against her. Well, that's not the simplest explanation. That she was just teleported to the other end of the galaxy.
Mm.
You should see it, Ozzy. You should see it, Ozzy. It's a great movie.
I have seen it, but
it's not.
Well, I remember I enjoyed it tremendously when I watched it, but it's been a long time.
It's I curl my teeth and grind my teeth every time I see that movie. It destroys. It's just it seems like a Christian propaganda movie, you know.
No, I disagree with that because it's a Hollywood movie, and I understand that the book is way different than the movie, but they had to find some common ground with whatever they were working out. But it's still a great movie. I agree. The end of the movie utterly sucked when she had that school class over. But it's a great movie, so.
Yeah, I think Occam's razor, well, applies somewhat differently. I think it wants to really be something like an initial algebra, where say no junk, no confusion. Junk is things that are not, I guess, logical consequences are specifically demanded by the logical system, or I guess carriers and generators and such. And of course, no confusion is not identifying elements that are the same would require to be distinct. So mean, for instance, in the case of like two theories, both of which have differing numbers of, say, explanatory entities, I don't know that you actually could say the one with fewer actually is truly better. But if you had a situation where you have, say, your explanatory group of concepts or things that to explain something, and you add into it that's not demanded by it all, then I think you have a clearer case of Occam's razor. But still,
Yeah, a difficulty with Occam's razor is that it is almost never the case when you're comparing two explanations that both explanations explain equally well. You can have one explanation that explains phenomena A, B, C, and it posits X, Y, Z. Okay, so it has X, Y, and Z as hypothetical entities or theoretical entities, and it explains A, B, C. Then you have another theory that explains a little more, A, B, C, D, and it posits W, X, Y, Z. It posits a little more, but it explains a little more. Okay, well now which one do you choose? Well the one that explains more is a better theory. Okay, so you can do that. But then it gets more complicated when they're explaining different properties and different phenomena, and they explain them differently, and they have different numbers of hypothetical entities. So really, it doesn't work when you're comparing apples and oranges. It only works when you're comparing two things that really explain all of the same phenomena and only those phenomena in common. And you can then actually look at the hypothetical or explanatory entities that they posit. Then you can do that analysis and say which is simpler. So it actually works better with thought experiments, for instance, than with any actual practical real-world explanations. Because in the real world explanations are messy, they're complicated, and you'll almost never find two explanations that in fact cover all of the phenomena equally well, and then it's a matter of, well, okay, they both cover all the phenomena equally well, they're identical in that respect. All we have to do now is look at the entities that they posit as explanatory entities. It's never that neat, or it's almost never that neat. So Occam's razor is just sort of, it's used as a kind of tiebreaker, but it's almost never a tie.
all right.
I have one last question for you, Ozzy.
Sure.
Have you seen Inside the Actors Studio?
Yeah, I know the show. I enjoy that show.
All right,
quite a lot,
because
so.
I'm going to ask you the same question because I've thought about doing this on the Magic Sandwich Show just for fun, so the fans can get to know you a little better. If it's okay with you.
Oh, I know. Okay, I get it now. Yes, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Sesquipedality.
What is your favorite curse word?
Wait, I want to explain that. Sesquipedality.
Okay.
Sesquipedality is the pretentious use of big words, of which sesquipedality is itself an instance.
Okay.
That's why it's my favorite word.
What is your favorite curse word?
Fuck. It's the most expressive word in the English language, I think. It has the most uses.
What is your favorite sound or noise?
Oh, I love hearing my wife laugh.
What is your least favorite sound or noise?
Traffic.
If you could have any other profession or job or education than you have now, what would it be?
I guess teaching critical thinking again. But I'm retired, so.
Okay. If heaven exists and you arrive at the pearly gates, what will you say to the Lord?
Fuck you!
I would say I was wrong. Forgive me, and where did I go wrong?
And what? And if you didn't have to say anything, and it was him who had to say something, what would you want him to say?
Okay, we're presuming the same God again, the God of Christianity.
No, it could be any God.
Okay. I would say, tell me how it was done.
Okay, that's it. That was the
Okay.
questions.
All right. Thank you. That was weird, but that was weird, but fun. Thank you.
I have always wanted to ask all the people on the Magic Sandwich Show those questions.
You should come on and ask them. That's actually a fun quiz. I watch that show all the time. It's kind of funny to think about what would I answer, and so that's why I said sesquipedality off
Actually,
the top of my head.
the most surprising answers was when he has died recently. It was when Robin Williams was on. He actually said he would want to be a theoretical physicist.
Yeah, yeah,
That was very strange.
yeah.
There's only one thing I want to say is, Ozzy, please write a book. I said it in the text chair. Please write it. Please go write a book.
Yeah. That's a way of telling me to shut up, right?
No.
No, I really don't have a thesis that I need to propound that is original. I sort of see my contribution in all of this to sort of articulating ideas that are sort of well understood in sort of critical thinking, logic, and philosophy and epistemology, and sort of broadcasting them to a wide audience. I think the easiest way I can do that is actually online and with my YouTube channel. I just uploaded a video today. I think that's sort of where I think I can make the most.
Ozzy,
The best
no. Ozzy, think about it, and then decide to write a book. We'll
Okay,
buy
if I ever think of a thesis where I think I can make a novel contribution to the subject, or if I think I can express it better than other people have, then I would.
Actually, if the Zeus can make a New York Times bestseller, I think you can too. Everybody can.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a mystery what makes a bestseller.
So anyway, I think we're starting to get towards the end now. Ozzy, do you want to talk a bit about the charity show that the Magic Sandwich Show is doing?
Yeah, DPR Jones is arranging a 24-hour marathon, a fundraising drive for MSF, Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders. It's running 24 hours. It's running this coming weekend, Saturday and Sunday. It's going to feature, of course, DPR Jones, who's going to be starting it off. But there's going to be just 1 hour after another of talented people. Aaron Raw is going to be there, of course. James Randi is going to be on the show, co-hosting. The Peach will be there. Steve Shives, Coctopus Prime. The cast of the Skeptic Fence will be there and co-hosting with Lawrence Krauss, Jacqueline Glenn, Dark Matter 2525, the Gin and Tonic Show. Seth Andrews, the Rational Atheist, is going to be there. I'm going to be hosting a show or hosting an hour with DPR Jones. So everyone's going to be having like an hour, a half an hour, or a couple of hours. So it's actually going to be, I think, quite interesting. I mean, you've got some really big guests in there, including James Randi and Lawrence Krauss, who are going to be participating to raise funds for Doctors Without Borders. Doctors Without Borders is an amazing charity. It's completely secular, non-sectarian. These are healthcare professionals who go into some of the scariest places in the world, war-ravaged sometimes, disease-ravaged places, to take care of people. And these are people who these are professionals who are well trained and have sacrificed a lot to do what they do, who could, if they wanted to, in the prime of their careers, be advancing their professional careers and increasing their own prestige and status in institutions. And instead, they're going to help people. So they need support. So I hope you'll watch and you'll contribute.
I think that's the best way to end it then. Okay, I'm going offline now.